The other day, I was walking through the hardware store of all places when it happened. I wasn't there for anything exciting, just some screws to fix a wobbly shelf in the shop. It's a quiet store, smells like sawdust and rubber, with those aisles that seem endless, full of things you didn't know you needed until you see them. I was halfway down the paint aisle when I spotted it. A stack of those little sample cards. You know, the kind that show 50 shades of beige like anyone actually paints their house Harvest Whisper. And then I saw one color. It was called Seafoam Green. Let me tell you, that stupid little rectangle of cardboard hit me like a brick. Seafoam Green isn't just a color. It's my grandmother's kitchen. The one she had at her little house on the edge of town, back when I was a kid. Her kitchen was like stepping into the inside of a mint lifesaver. Walls painted that exact shade, with a matching Formica table and chairs that squeaked every time you moved. She had this ancient stove that rattled like a tin can full of nails and a window over the sink where you could just barely see the top of her garden fence. That kitchen? It was where everything happened. Thanksgiving dinners, last-minute science projects, quiet afternoons where she'd hum to herself while kneading bread dough. I can still hear the sound of her humming. I never knew the song, but it didn't matter. It felt like safety. One summer, I must have been about 12, Grandma decided I was going to help her repaint the kitchen. The walls had started peeling a little, and she said they needed freshening up. She handed me a brush and a bucket of seafoam green paint and said, "Let's get to work." I spent the next 3 days covered in paint from head to toe because I thought flinging it at the wall was faster than using a brush. Grandma didn't yell, though. She just laughed and called me Jackson Pollock. At the time, I didn't know who that was, but I assumed he was some kind of famous idiot. When we were done, she let me sign my name in the corner, right behind the fridge, where no one would ever see it unless they moved the thing. She said, "This way, you're a part of this kitchen forever." Years later, after she passed, I helped my mom clean out the house. Most of the stuff went into storage or Goodwill, but I couldn't bring myself to touch the kitchen. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at the walls, remembering the way they smelled of fresh paint and her lavender hand soap. The fridge was still there, humming softly. I thought about moving it to see if my signature was still there, but I didn't. Some things I figured are better left alone. But standing in that hardware store, holding that seafoam green card, it felt like I'd moved the fridge. Like I was 12 again, paint splattered and laughing while Grandma hummed a tune I'd never know the words to. I ended up taking the card home with me. Didn't buy any paint, just slipped it into my wallet. Now it's wedged behind my driver's license. And every time I see it, I think of that kitchen. I think of her. It's funny, isn't it? How something as small as a color can bring back a whole world. I'd almost forgotten the way she'd look at me when she told me to stop fussing and eat your soup, or the way the light hit her hair when she worked in the garden. But that color brought it all back. And the thing is, it didn't make me sad. Not really. It felt more like gratitude, I guess. Like, out of all the little details my brain could have held on to, it chose that kitchen. It chose her laugh. It chose the smell of lavender soap and the hum of that rattling stove. I don't know why, but I'm glad it did. So, now I'm curious. What's the smallest, most random thing that's ever yanked you into a memory like that? A smell? A sound? A color? I'd love to hear it. I swear, the smell of fresh asphalt does something weird to my brain. Like, last week I was walking back to my apartment, and the city crew had just finished repaving the street. One whiff, and suddenly I was 11 again, hanging out in my cousin Maddie's backyard on one of those sticky summer nights when the world felt huge and full of secrets. It's funny how a smell can do that, right? Just pick you up and drop you somewhere else, no warning. Maddie's house was this little ranch-style place in a neighborhood that always seemed stuck in the 70s. Her parents were the type who collected wind chimes and let ivy crawl all over their fence, so her backyard felt like stepping into some kind of fairy tale jungle. Maddie and I practically lived out there during summer break, dragging blankets and flashlights under the big maple tree that leaned just enough to make it perfect for climbing. That tree was our kingdom. We had a whole system of territories with different branches named after random stuff we loved. The biggest one was Dragon's Keep, where Maddie would perch with a walkie-talkie in hand, pretending to be our fearless commander. I got the smaller branch, Spy's Nest, because I was the stealth expert. Mostly, that meant hiding in the leaves and throwing acorns at the neighbor's cat whenever it wandered too close. On the rare nights we got to camp out in the yard, Maddie's dad would haul out this old radio with the dials half worn off. It only picked up a handful of stations, but we didn't care. We'd scroll past everything else until we found that scratchy late-night DJ who played the weirdest mix of 80s synth and stuff we'd never heard before. To this day, whenever I hear Take On Me, I'm right back there, lying on a beach towel under the stars with Maddie, trying to figure out if that song was about heartbreak or robots. Maybe both. One time we decided to stay up all night, not just pretend to, but actually do it. Maddie had this tiny, crappy telescope she'd gotten from a garage sale, and we were convinced we could use it to spot UFOs if we tried hard enough. Around 2 a.m., she swore she saw something blinking over the horizon. I wanted to believe her, but it turned out to be the light on top of a cell tower. That didn't stop her from drawing the alien spacecraft in her notebook the next morning. Maddie was always like that, turning the ordinary into something magical. And then there was the asphalt incident. That's what we called it, even years later. Her dad had just redone the driveway, and Maddie decided we should leave a secret message in the wet cement. Not just initials or a dumb handprint like normal kids. No, Maddie wanted to write out the code to our secret language, a ridiculous mix of made-up words and symbols we'd invented over weeks of boredom. We spent the whole afternoon carving it out with a stick, working in shifts so her parents wouldn't catch us. When it dried, it looked like some kind of ancient runestone, which made us even prouder. Maddie swore it'd still be there when we were old ladies, like a time capsule only we could read. Of course, her mom found it the next day and freaked out. She made Maddie's dad redo the driveway, and our runestone got buried under another layer of asphalt. Maddie cried, but I told her it didn't matter. It's still there, I said. Underneath. Nobody can see it, but we know it's there. She liked that idea. It became this private little joke between us, a reminder that even when things disappeared, they weren't really gone. I haven't seen Maddie in years. She moved to Denver after college, and we just drifted, I guess. Life does that. But sometimes when I'm wandering around the city with my camera, I'll spot something, a faded mural, a crack in the sidewalk shaped like a heart, and I think about her. I think about how we used to believe the world was full of secret messages, waiting to be discovered if you just looked hard enough. A couple of weeks ago, I was exploring an abandoned train station on the outskirts of town, and I found this chunk of graffiti that reminded me of our old runestone. It was just a bunch of symbols, half worn away by time. But for a second, it felt like Maddie was standing right next to me, her face lit up with that wild grin she always got when she found something important. I took a Polaroid and left it there, tucked into the cracks of the wall. Maybe some other explorer will find it someday and feel that same little jolt of wonder. Anyway, that's what the smell of fresh asphalt made me think about last week. Weird how your brain works, huh? What about you? What little memory always sneaks up on you and makes you smile? It began with a knock at the door. Not the timid kind like someone selling magazines, and not the aggressive kind like someone who knows you owe them money. No, it was the kind of knock that carried weight, like whoever was on the other side knew something you didn't. I didn't open it right away. Living in Savannah, you learn that some knocks aren't meant to be answered. I sat there, nursing a mug of chicory coffee, staring at the door like it was going to explain itself. It didn't. It just waited, patient as a ghost. Finally, curiosity won out. I swung the door open, ready to tell whoever it was that I didn't want what they were selling. But there was no one there, just the street, dappled with light from the oaks, and a brown package resting neatly on my doormat. No address, no return label, just my name, scrawled in looping, old-fashioned handwriting. The kind you see in letters written with quills. Now, I know better than to bring strange packages into my home. People always assume paranormal tour guides are fearless, but I'm not. I am cautious. You have to be when you spend your days poking around in the spiritual equivalent of hornet nests. But something about the package felt intentional, like it had been sent for me, not to me. Inside was a book, a leather-bound journal with gold filigree on the cover and a faint smell of salt water. It looked ancient, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a museum under glass. And on the first page, there was a note to Miss Evelyn Gray, who seeks the past but may now find the future. This is your guide. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the wording felt personal. Turning the pages, I found sketches of buildings I didn't recognize, strange symbols in the margins, and cryptic passages written in a mix of English and a language I couldn't identify. The only thing I understood fully was the map folded into the back. A hand-drawn map of Savannah, but not the Savannah I knew. Streets that no longer existed were marked, and in the corner was a single word, Providence. I can't explain why, but I knew I had to follow it. The first stop on the map was a house on Gaston Street, one I'd passed 1,000 times on my tours but never paid much attention to. It was a quiet place, tucked under the shade of live oaks, with faded shutters and a wrought iron fence that looked more decorative than functional. The journal described it as the threshold. When I arrived, the house looked abandoned, but the gate swung open with a groan before I even touched it. I paused, checking the street to see if anyone was watching. No one was. Savannah has a way of being empty just when you're about to do something stupid. Inside the gate, the air felt heavier, like stepping into a different season. I walked up the cracked path to the front door, which stood ajar. "Hello," I called, half hoping no one would answer. A voice answered anyway. "Come in, Evelyn." I froze. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. My name wasn't on any sign-up sheet, and yet there it was, spoken with the kind of casual familiarity you only hear from old friends. The voice belonged to a woman, sitting in the dim light of what must have once been a grand parlor. She was dressed like someone out of a daguerreotype, with a high-collared dress and lace gloves, but her eyes were alive with something sharp and knowing. "You have questions," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "And I have answers. You're going to have to narrow that down," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "The journal," she said, tapping her own temple. "You opened it. That means it's yours now." "Okay," I said slowly, lowering myself into the chair. "What exactly does that mean?" She smiled, the kind of smile that felt like it belonged in a storm, not on a face. "It means the city isn't what you think it is. It never was." She went on to tell me that Savannah existed in layers, like a palimpsest, with pieces of its past bleeding through into its present. The journal, she said, was a map to those layers. "You see the cracks, don't you?" she asked. "The moments when the world feels too thin, like you could reach through and touch something else." I thought about the time I'd seen a man in colonial dress walking down Broughton Street, only for him to vanish the moment I blinked. Or the night I'd heard someone humming Greensleeves in a cemetery long after the tours had ended. "So, what am I supposed to do with it?" I asked, holding up the journal. "Follow it," she said simply. "Find the places it leads you to, and listen." "Listen to what?" "To whatever speaks," she said, leaning back in her chair. "You'll know when you hear it." I wanted to ask her 1,000 more questions, but when I looked up, the room was empty. The chair she'd been sitting in was covered in dust, and the fireplace was cold. The journal led me to 3 more places that day. A forgotten garden overgrown with wild jasmine, a hidden alleyway that smelled of cigars and rain, and a fountain I'd never seen before, even though I'd walked past that square 100 times. In each place, I felt something like a whisper brushing against the edges of my mind. By the time the sun set, I was back in my apartment, staring at the journal as if it might start writing itself. The map had changed, new locations inked in with the same delicate hand as before. The last entry read, "Trust the melody. It's yours now." I still don't know what the journal is or who sent it, but I feel like the city is alive in a way I never noticed before. It hums beneath my feet, in the creak of the floorboards and the rustle of the Spanish moss. I don't know where it's leading me, but I'm not afraid to follow. Have you ever had a day where the world seemed to peel back its layers and show you what was hiding underneath? You ever have one of those nights where it feels like the air is waiting for something to happen? Like everything's just hanging in this thick, sticky quiet, and you can almost hear it crackling, waiting for a spark? That was me last July, walking down Grayson Street, sweating through my shirt and carrying a bag of ice for the party because someone forgot to fill the cooler. Again, that's when I saw him, the guy with the headlights. Now, before you think this is some rom-com thing, it's not. This isn't about me meeting the love of my life under the dim glow of LED beams or whatever. This is about justice, or at least the kind of justice I've been imagining since my license first burned a hole in my wallet. You know what I mean? Those high beams. The ones that sear your retinas and make it feel like you're suddenly trapped in some twisted spotlight, driving blind into eternity. This guy wasn't just using his high beams. Oh no, he had those aftermarket LED monstrosities, the kind that turn a Tulane road into a Hollywood premiere. And he was driving slow, just rolling through the neighborhood like he owned the place. I wanted to yell, "What's wrong with you? You trying to summon Batman or something?" But instead, I just stood there on the sidewalk, squinting and clutching my bag of melting ice like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Then he stopped, just parked his stupid lifted truck right in front of me, the lights still blazing. I had two options: keep walking and pretend I wasn't halfway blind, or say something. Normally, I'd pick the first option. I'm not exactly known for my confrontational streak. But that night, that air, it was begging for trouble. So I dropped the ice, marched right up to his window, and knocked. The guy looked like every stereotype you've ever heard about truck owners. Baseball cap, mirrored sunglasses, and a grin that said he was enjoying this way too much. "Can I help you?" he asked, like I'd interrupted some sacred ritual. "Yeah," I said, pointing at the sun, or rather his headlights. "You trying to power the grid with those things, or what? People live here, you know." He laughed, which only made me angrier. "They're legal," he said. "Nothing you can do about it." "Legal doesn't mean they're not obnoxious." I shot back. "You ever try not being a menace to society?" At that point, I thought he'd drive off, maybe yell something stupid like "snowflake" out the window. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, looked me up and down like he was deciding whether I was worth the effort, and said, "You seem real passionate about this. What are you going to do? Start a petition?" Now, if I were smarter or calmer, I might have walked away. But like I said, the air was crackling that night, and my mouth didn't get the memo. "Yeah, maybe I will," I snapped. "Bon stupid headlights. Make the road safe for actual human eyes again." He laughed again, louder this time. "Good luck with that," he said, revving the engine before peeling off in a roar of noise and light, leaving me standing there like some hero in an anticlimactic movie ending. But here's the thing, I did start a petition. The next day, fueled by spite and 3 cups of coffee, I went online and wrote this long, ranting manifesto about how headlights like that are ruining lives. Okay, maybe that's dramatic, but it felt true at the time. And people loved it. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been flashbanged on the way to the grocery store or blinded on a late-night drive home. Within a week, I had thousands of signatures. Within a month, I was on local news, sitting under a slightly less blinding studio spotlight, explaining to some anchor why this mattered. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. You're really out here fighting for dimmer headlights while the world's on fire? But honestly, sometimes the small stuff is what keeps us sane. It's a way to say, hey, not everything has to be terrible. We can fix this one stupid thing. I don't know if anything will come of it. I hear these things take forever, and honestly, I've moved on to other battles. But every now and then, I think about that guy and his smug little smirk, and it makes me smile. Because somewhere out there, he's driving around with his obnoxious lights, and he has no idea he started a movement. It's the dead of winter in Chicago. January. Snow everywhere. Wind sharp enough to cut through your soul. I'm walking to the bus stop after my late-night data structures class, bundled up in my puffy coat, like a sentient marshmallow. The sidewalk's a mess of slush and ice, and I'm doing this awkward shuffle step to avoid wiping out when my phone buzzes in my pocket. I grab it, gloveless fingers instantly regretting every life choice that led me to this moment. And it's a notification from a delivery app. My first reaction is confusion, because I'm not waiting on food. Then I realize it's a notification for delivering food. And that's when it hits me. 3 weeks ago, I signed up for a side hustle as a delivery driver, but I'd totally forgotten because they never assigned me shifts. Until now. So there I am, standing in the middle of slush hell, staring at my phone like an idiot while it pings with an order for a burrito place 10 blocks away. The logical part of me is screaming, just decline it. But the broke college kid part of me, the one who's been surviving on cereal and vending machine Pop-Tarts, is like, dude, it's $20. You need this. I accept the order. 15 minutes later, I'm in the restaurant waiting for a burrito the size of a newborn. The smell is incredible, and my stomach's growling loud enough to get side eyes from the cashier. Finally, They hand me the bag, and I head back out into the Arctic tundra, determined to make this delivery happen. The app says the drop-off is only a few miles away, but of course, this is Chicago, so those few miles feel like the Oregon Trail. My boots are soaked, my fingers are icicles, and the burrito? It's still warm, mocking me with its deliciousness. Then the fun part happens. I make it to the apartment building, but the customer didn't leave an apartment number, just a name, Chris. I try calling, no answer. I buzz every single unit in the building like a maniac. Nothing. Meanwhile, I'm freezing, holding this burrito like it's a hostage negotiation. I'm ready to give up and just eat it myself when a guy stumbles out of the building next door. He's wearing pajamas and flip-flops in the snow, holding a leash attached to a Pomeranian that looks as miserable as I feel. "Hey, you Chris," I call out, waving the bag like it's a peace offering. The guy squints at me, then the bag, and finally the dog. "Yeah, that's me. No epaleti. No explanasten." Just grabs the burrito and heads back inside. I stand there for a second, dumbfounded. The dog gives me this look like, "Sorry, man. He's the worst." And then they're gone. Now, this is where the story should end, right? But no. The next day, I get another notification from the app. Same burrito place. Same address. I almost decline it out of spite, but curiosity gets the better of me. What are the odds it's Chris again? Turns out, very high. I walk up to the building, and who's waiting outside? Flip-flop Chris, looking exactly like he did the night before, except this time he's holding a $5 bill. "Hey, sorry about yesterday," he says, handing me the cash. "Didn't mean to leave you hanging." I don't know what surprises me more, that he remembered or that he tipped me in cash when he could have just added it on the app. Either way, I nod, feeling weirdly appreciated for the first time since starting this gig. "No problem," I say, because I'm trying to play it cool, even though deep down I'm just happy someone acknowledged my suffering. Here's the weird part. Chris starts ordering burritos almost every other night, and I keep being the one to deliver them. Eventually, we start chatting, nothing deep, just weather and football and why his dog hates snow. And somehow, in the middle of all this randomness, I realize something. The whole thing is oddly comforting. Like, yeah, life is cold and chaotic, but every now and then, there's a tiny moment where someone hands you $5 and says, "Thanks for showing up." So, I gotta know, have you ever had a completely random encounter that turned into something unexpectedly meaningful? Maybe not life-changing, but just enough to make you go, huh, people aren't so bad after. I have this ridiculous little habit that I didn't even realize was weird until my roommate pointed it out last year. You know how most people, when they're into someone, might try to subtly get their attention? Like, maybe they'll laugh a little louder, wear their best outfit, or do that whole, "Oh, fancy seeing you here" thing? Not me. No, my move is okay, don't laugh. I start narrating my life in my head like it's a nature documentary, and the person I like is some majestic animal I'm trying to study. Yeah, I turn into David Attenborough of the dating world. The first time I noticed I was doing it, I was at this tiny bookstore/cafe where I go to write sometimes or pretend to write while scrolling Instagram. There was this girl sitting a few tables over, reading the bell jar, and she had this messy bun that looked like it was an accident, but was definitely deliberate. You know the type? Effortlessly cool in a way that makes you question every life choice you've ever made. And there I was sipping my burnt latte when the voice in my head just started up like, "And here we have the elusive indie bookworm, immersed in her natural habitat. Note the oversized cardigan and faint air of existential despair. Truly a remarkable specimen." I nearly spit my coffee everywhere. It was like my brain decided that flirting was too risky, so it shifted gears into full-on narration mode. I kept watching her, not in a creepy way, okay, I swear, and the voice just kept going. Watch as she delicately sips her chamomile tea, unaware of the awkward male fumbling with his laptop 3 tables away. Will he muster the courage to speak, or will he remain a silent observer, doomed to replay this moment in his mind for years to come? Spoiler, I did not muster the courage. But the narration didn't stop there. Nope, it followed me home. I caught myself later that night, brushing my teeth and thinking. And here we see the young fool, lost in thought as he prepares for another sleepless night, haunted by the memory of the one who got away. Like, seriously, who does that? But the thing is, once I realized I did it, I couldn't stop. It's like my brain decided every crush deserved their own National Geographic special. There was this guy at the gym who always wore these neon yellow running shoes and had the kind of jawline that could cut glass. The first time I saw him, I dropped the dumbbell on my own foot because I was too busy staring. And while I was hopping around in pain, the voice in my head just went, "Behold, the apex predator of the fitness world. Muscular, focused, and entirely oblivious to the disaster unfolding in his vicinity." Or the girl in my acting class who absolutely killed it in a scene from a streetcar named Desire. She had this raspy voice like she smoked a pack a day, but I knew she didn't because she once went on a 10-minute rant about how bad smoking was for your skin. The voice in my head chimed in during our break. Observe the dramatic artist in her element. A force of nature, both alluring and intimidating. She strikes fear into the hearts of mere mortals attempting to match her intensity. And then she caught me staring and asked if I needed something, and I panicked and said, "No, just breathing. Just breathing." Who even says that? What's worse is that the narration isn't just descriptive, it's judgy. Like, I'll start analyzing everything they do, as if I'm trying to unlock the secrets of their personality through sheer observation. Notice how he adjusts his glasses every 5 minutes. Is it a nervous tic, or simply a habit developed over years of meticulous self-awareness? She orders her salad without dressing, a curious choice, perhaps indicative of a complex inner world. It's like my brain is writing a dissertation on them, complete with footnotes. The absolute pinnacle of this nonsense happened a few months ago at work. I'm a waiter at this trendy little spot in West Hollywood, and this couple came in, a guy and a girl, both ridiculously attractive in that way that makes you think, yeah, I'm definitely a background character in their rom-com. But the girl? She was stunning. Like, how even real stunning. And as I took their order, the voice in my head went, "And here we witness the unattainable dream girl, accompanied by her equally flawless partner. Together, they radiate an aura of effortless perfection, leaving mere mortals in their wake." I must have spaced out for a second, because the guy had to repeat his order twice, and my manager gave me that look from across the room. But the voice in my head just kept going, narrating the whole interaction as if I wasn't even there. The awkward waiter stumbles over his words, a reminder of the stark contrast between the extraordinary and the painfully ordinary. After they left, my coworker Maria asked why I looked like someone had stolen my tips, and I just shrugged it off like, "Oh, you know life." But the truth was, I was too busy imagining what the voice would have said if I'd actually flirted with her. Probably something like, and thus, the young fool embarks on a bold and futile quest, unaware of the heartbreak that surely awaits. I know it's ridiculous. I know it's just my overactive imagination turning crushes into documentaries no one will ever watch. But honestly, it kind of makes things fun. Like, yeah, I may never actually ask these people out, but at least I get a good story out of it. Plus, there's something comforting about framing life as this big, cinematic adventure, even if it's mostly in my head. So, there you have it. My weird little quirk. I don't flirt, I narrate. What about you? Do you have any strange habits when it comes to crushes? Like, do you suddenly turn into a stand-up comedian or rehearse imaginary conversations in your head? Please tell me I'm not the only one out here turning my love life into a BBC special. You know that feeling when you do something, and the second it's over, you feel like an idiot? Like, not oops, I spilled my coffee, idiot, but what is wrong with me on a spiritual level, idiot? That's where I'm at. Except it's not coffee, it's her. Her name's Danny. That's what she said when she slid into the seat across from me at Lucky's Tavern last Saturday. Didn't even ask, just plopped down, grinned, and said, "You're gonna buy me a drink, right?" Like I was just waiting for her all my life. Which, okay, maybe I was. I laughed because, what else are you supposed to do? "Sure," I said, flagging down the bartender. "Whiskey." She shook her head. "Vodka soda. Gotta keep it classy." Let me tell you something about Danny. She's the kind of person who makes you feel like you're the only thing in the world that matters for about 5 seconds. Then she's on to the next thing, and you're left scrambling to keep up. She asked me 100 questions that night. What I do, what I like, what my most embarrassing moment is falling off a stage in high school, thanks for asking. Every time I answered, she'd lean forward, her chin in her hand, like she was hanging on my every word. And then she'd hit me with something out of left field. So, you ever think about robbing a bank? You blinked to hear. Oh, no? Me neither, she said, swirling her drink. But don't you think it'd be fun? Like, you and me, ski masks, a getaway car. We'd be good at it. Would we? I asked, half laughing. Oh, totally. I'd be the brains, you'd be the driver. You look like a good driver. I'm not. I once backed into a parked car and didn't realize until I got home. But I didn't tell her that. We stayed until closing, and then she said, "Your place or mine?" Like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't even hesitate. My place is a disaster, but I didn't care. I was riding the high of Danny's attention, like a kid who found fireworks in the garage and decided tonight's the night to burn down the neighborhood. The next few hours were chaotic. In the best way, sure, but also in the what the hell am I doing way. She was wild and loud and made fun of my crappy taste in music when she found my Spotify playlist. We knocked over a lamp, and she called it a casualty of passion, which made me laugh so hard I almost fell off the bed. When it was over, she sat up, grabbed my phone off the nightstand, and said, "Let's take a selfie. You still here?" "Why?" "To remember this by," she said, grinning. "You're not going to forget me, but just in case." I didn't have the heart to tell her. I already knew I wasn't going to forget her. Not because she was unforgettable, but because people like me don't forget things like this. They stick to us like gum on the bottom of a shoe. She left around 4 a.m., waving as she walked out the door, like we just had coffee instead of, well, everything else. And that's when it hit me. That deep, gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I'd swallowed a brick. I spent the next day doing everything I could to shake it. Cleaned my apartment, went for a run, bad idea, I'm not a runner. Even called my mom to ask about her garden. But the feeling didn't go away. It wasn't guilt exactly. I've done guilt before, forgotten birthdays, ghosting people I probably shouldn't have. This was something else. Like I'd opened a door I wasn't supposed to, and now couldn't close it. By Monday, I convinced myself to move on. Danny was fun, wild, a story I'd tell myself when life got boring. Except then she texted me, "Danny, hey, you busy tonight?" I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. My brain was screaming, "Don't do it," but my fingers had other plans. Me, not busy. "What's up?" She showed up at my door 2 hours later with a pizza and a bottle of wine. This time, she asked to hear my worst breakup story. I told her about the time I got dumped in a Taco Bell parking lot. She laughed so hard she choked on her wine. And just like that, I was hooked. We've been hanging out for 3 weeks now, and every time she leaves, I feel the same brick in my stomach feeling. She never stays the night, never talks about anything deeper than hypothetical bank robberies and bad breakup stories. And every time she texts me, I tell myself I'm not going to respond. But I do. Here's the thing. I know this isn't going anywhere. Danny's like a firework, beautiful, exciting, and impossible to hold on to. And I'm the idiot standing too close, watching her burn out and pretending I won't get burned. But for now, I'll take the burns. Because sometimes being reckless feels like the closest thing to being alive. Even if you know it's going to hurt later. Let me tell you about this one time that a regular Tuesday turned into something I still can't explain. And look, I'm not saying it was magic or fate or whatever, but I'm not saying it either. You'll see what I mean. So it starts with me running late. I'm usually on top of my morning routine, but the espresso machine at home decided to throw a tantrum. And then my dog, Buster, managed to knock over the bag of grain I had prepped for the new batch of beer I'm brewing. Pale me maybe, for those keeping track. Long story short, by the time I get to the pub, I'm already in a mood. I park in the usual spot in the back lot, next to this beat-up blue pickup truck that I'm sure has been there for weeks. It's one of those vehicles that looks like it belongs to a guy who lives in the woods and trades stories for firewood. Anyway, I'm about to head inside when I notice something weird. There's a small jar sitting on the truck's hood. I mean, who leaves a jar just out there in the open? It's not your average mason jar either. It's got this swirly pattern etched into the glass, like the kind of thing you'd see at one of those artisan markets where the vendors have names like Moonbeam and Hawthorne. Inside the jar, there's this golden, glowing dust. No label. Nori. Just sitting there, catching the morning light like it's trying to audition for a commercial. Now, normal people might just walk away, but not me. No, My brain goes, that's probably cursed or something, but you should definitely touch it. So I do. I pick it up, and the jar is warm. Not like it's been in the sun warm, but alive warm. And then, because I'm a grown man with the impulse control of a Labrador, I tap my finger into the dust. Nothing happens at first. I'm standing there, half expecting to turn into a frog or get struck by lightning, but it's just quiet. The air feels heavier, like right before a thunderstorm. Then I sneeze, huge, obnoxious, like the kind that scares birds out of trees, and the dust in the jar flares up, bright as a flashlight. When I open my eyes, the parking lot looks the same, but not. It's hard to explain. Everything is sharper, more vivid. The colors feel like they've been turned up to 11. The brick wall of the pub looks like it just got a fresh coat of paint, even though I know it hasn't been touched in years. The air smells like pine needles and fresh bread, which is weird because the bakery next door hasn't been open since COVID. And then there's the crow. This big, glossy black crow swoops down out of nowhere and lands on the truck's side mirror. It's staring at me with eyes that are way too intelligent for comfort. It tilts its head, caws once, and then flies off toward the street. I don't know why, but I follow it. I know, who follows a random bird, but something about it feels right. It leads me past the bakery, down Main Street, and into the park. The park is different, too. The trees are taller, the grass greener, and there's this faint hum in the air, like distant music you can't quite place. At the center of the park, by the old stone fountain, there's a man sitting on a bench. He's wearing a suit, but not like a modern one. This thing is vintage, all pinstripes and brass buttons, like he walked out of a noir film. He's holding a pocket watch, flipping it open and closed like he's waiting for someone. When he sees me, he grins. "You've got glitter on your nose," he says. I wipe my face instinctively, and sure enough, there's gold dust smeared across my fingers. Sorry, I stammer. Didn't realize I was trespassing on a fairy tale. He laughs, a low, rich sound that somehow makes the birds go quiet. "Not a fairy tale," he says. "More like a moment borrowed from something bigger. But you're here now, so we might as well make the most of it." I don't know what to say to that, so I just stand there feeling like I've wandered into a movie scene without a script. He pats the bench beside him, and I sit down because, honestly, what else am I supposed to do? "You've been busy," he says like he knows me. "Too busy. Chasing kegs and puns and schedules. Tell me, when's the last time you stopped and really looked at things?" I open my mouth to argue, but the words don't come. He's not wrong. I've been so caught up in running the pub, coming up with new beer recipes, dealing with inventory, staff, repairs, everything, that I can't even remember the last time I just sat and enjoyed anything. He nods, like he can read my mind. "Here," he says, handing me the pocket watch. "It's not for keeping time, it's for finding it. Take it, and when you're ready, wind it." Before I can ask what the hell he's talking about, he stands up, tips his hat, and walks off into the trees. I sit there for a while, turning the watch over in my hands. It's heavier than it looks, and the face is blank. No numbers, no hands, just a smooth surface that reflects the sunlight. Eventually, I head back to the pub. Everything's back to normal. No glowing dust, no talking birds, just the usual crowd and the sound of pints clinking. But I keep the watch in my pocket. That night, after I close up, I wind it, just a little, and for a moment, the air hums again, and the world feels sharper, brighter. I don't know what it means or what's supposed to happen next, but it's a reminder, I think, a nudge, to slow down, to pay attention, to find the magic in the mundane. So yeah, that's my Tuesday. Have you ever stumbled into something that felt like it belonged to another world or another store? I wasn't expecting anything special when I walked into the thrift store. It was one of those, what the hell, I got 20 minutes to kill kind of stops. The place smelled like old books and carpet cleaner, and the aisles were packed with mismatched furniture, weird ceramics, and clothes no one had worn since 2003. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just doing that aimless wander where you let your brain take a break. And then I saw it, tucked between a stack of janky DVD players and a busted karaoke machine, was this old Viewmaster. You know, those chunky plastic things you stick picture reels into, and suddenly you were in 3D dinosaur land or the Grand Canyon. Bright red, with the little lever on the side, pure childhood magic. My chest did this weird thud, and I froze, staring at it like it was going to disappear if I blinked. Here's the thing, I haven't thought about Viewmasters in, 15 years? Maybe more. But holding that thing in my hands, the weight of it, the smooth plastic against my palms, even the faint click of the lever, it was like someone hit play on a movie I didn't even know I remembered. Suddenly, I'm 9 years old, sitting on my bedroom floor in Boulder City, sunlight pouring through the window, and everything smells like crayons and dust. My mom bought me my first Viewmaster at a garage sale for like $2. It came with 3 reels, one of the zoo, one of outer space, and one of, wait for it, clowns. I hated clowns, but I kept that reel anyway because it felt wrong to throw it out. I remember how I'd press my face against the little eyepiece, so hard I'd leave red marks on my skin. And every time I clicked the lever, I'd whisper, "Whoa," like out loud, every single time. But the best part wasn't even the reels it came with. My grandpa, this wiry, no-nonsense kind of guy who worked as a mechanic and swore like it was punctuation, bought me a custom reel one Christmas. He took these old Kodachrome slides he'd snapped in the 70s on some camping trip to Yellowstone and had them turned into a reel just for me. I still remember the first time I looked at it. There was this picture of a waterfall and another of a moose standing in a river, and my favorite, a close-up of these bright yellow wildflowers against the bluest sky I'd ever seen. Grandpa sat next to me the whole time I clicked through it, pointing at the tiny pictures like they were postcards from some secret world he wanted me to know about. "See that moose?" he said, his voice all gravelly and warm. That guy stared me down for 20 minutes. Thought he was going to charge me. I gasped, even though he'd told that story a dozen times before. Standing there in the thrift store, all those memories came rushing back. The Viewmaster felt smaller in my hands than I remembered, but the magic? Still there. For a second, I could almost hear Grandpa's laugh, the kind that started as a low rumble before erupting into this full-body roar. I could smell the coffee he always drank, burnt and way too strong, and hear the crackle of the fire pit he'd always light when we camped out in the backyard. I bought the Viewmaster, obviously. $5, no reels, but I didn't care. I just wanted it. Later that night, I dug through my closet and found this old box labeled Josh's Stuff, written in my mom's handwriting. It had been sitting there for years, untouched. Inside, buried under a mountain of random junk, was a Ziploc bag with a single reel in it. Yellowstone. Grandpa's reel. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. When I clicked it into the Viewmaster and held it up to my face, there it was, the moose, the flowers, the waterfall. All of it exactly how I remembered. Except this time, it felt even more vivid. Like the pictures weren't just slides, but pieces of my childhood stitched together. I sat there on the couch, staring into that little plastic window like a kid again. For hours, I clicked through the reel, over and over, letting myself get lost in it. And I swear, I could almost feel Grandpa sitting next to me, pointing and laughing and telling me stories about the moose and the flowers and how the waterfall was so loud it could have drowned out Sinatra. Isn't it wild how something as small as a toy can bring back a whole world you thought you'd lost? Like 1 second, you're a grown-ass adult trying to keep it together, and the next, you're 9 years old with crayon dust on your fingers and no clue how good you've got it. Anyway, that's my trip down memory lane. What about you? What's the one thing you've stumbled across that felt like finding a secret doorway back to your favorite part of being a kid? It's funny how the worst day of your life can start off so normal. That Thursday, I woke up late, shoved a stale Pop-Tart in my mouth, and sprinted to catch the bus, which, as usual, smelled like old gym socks and bad decisions. I sat in my usual spot, third row, window seat, and stared out at the suburban wasteland, blissfully unaware that my entire world was about to implode. The first sign that something was off came during second period, when I opened my locker and found a live goldfish swimming in a clear plastic bag. Now, our school was weird, sure. Once, a kid brought an iguana to home EC, claiming it was his emotional support lizard. But this was new. "Hey, Beth," said Mark from the locker next to mine. "You're looking a little fishy today." Emotso, examining le bec. There was no note, no explanation, just a goldfish doing lazy circles in its tiny aquarium. I thought about dumping it in the nearest trash can, but something about its tiny, dumb face stopped me. Instead, I carried it to class, where it sat on my desk and stared at me the entire time like it knew something I didn't. By lunch, rumors were flying. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd been gifted a mysterious goldfish. Half the school was carrying little plastic bags, and nobody knew why. Even the teachers were spooked. Mr. Harris, my math teacher, spent the entire period muttering about juvenile delinquents and animal cruelty. "It's like a cult or something," said my best friend, Zara, as we sat in the cafeteria. She poked at her spaghetti with a plastic fork, her goldfish swimming peacefully in a bag next to her tray. "Maybe it's some kind of social experiment. Or maybe it's just a stupid prank," I said, though I wasn't convinced. Something about it felt calculated. Like whoever was behind this wanted us to think it was random when it wasn't. And then, right on cue, the fire alarm went off. We groaned, grabbing our stuff and filing out into the parking lot. It was freezing, and I was shivering in my hoodie, clutching my goldfish like it was my lifeline. Zara was mid-rant about how she was going to strangle whoever pulled that alarm when we noticed the commotion. There, in the center of the football field, was a giant kiddie pool. And in the kiddie pool, hundreds of goldfish swimming around like they were at some kind of bizarre fish rave. Surrounding the pool were dozens of students, holding their bags and looking just as confused as we were. "What the hell is this?" Zara said, her eyes wide. "No idea," I said, but my stomach was churning. Something about the scene felt off, like the calm before a storm. And then, the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention, students," boomed a voice. It wasn't the principal. It was deeper, colder, and dripping with theatrical flair. "Congratulations. You've all been chosen to participate in a game. The rules are simple. Add your fish to the pool, or face the consequences." "What consequences?" someone shouted, but the voice ignored them. "You have 5 minutes," it said. "Choose wisely." The crowd erupted into chaos. Some kids were laughing, thinking it was a joke. Others were freaking out, clutching their goldfish like they were family heirlooms. Zara turned to me, her face pale. "What do we do?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing. On one hand, it was probably a prank. On the other hand, what if it wasn't? What if there were consequences? Before I could decide, a sophomore stepped forward and dumped his fish into the pool. The voice came back, softer this time, almost smug. "Good choice, David," it said. "You're safe." "Safe from what?" Zara hissed, but nobody answered. One by one, more kids stepped forward, adding their fish to the pool. Each time, the voice would congratulate them. And each time, my anxiety grew. "What if we keep it?" I asked, looking at my fish. It stared back at me, its tiny mouth opening and closing like it was gasping for air. "I don't think that's an option," Zara said, glancing nervously at the pool. "What if this is like the Hunger Games but with goldfish?" "That's insane," I said, though deep down, I wasn't so sure. By the time the 5 minutes were up, most of the students had complied. Only a handful of us were left clutching our fish, staring at the pool like it was a portal to another dimension. The loudspeaker crackled again. "Time's up," the voice said. "For those of you who failed to comply, enjoy your prize." The next thing I knew, sprinklers erupted from the ground, drenching us in ice-cold water. It wasn't just water, though. It was dyed bright orange, staining our clothes, our skin, everything. The kids who'd added their fish to the pool erupted into laughter as we stood there, humiliated and dripping. "That's it," Zara said, glaring at the loudspeaker. "Orange water? That's your big punishment?" The voice didn't respond, but I swear I could feel it smirking. As the sprinklers shut off and we trudged back inside, I couldn't help but laugh. It was stupid, ridiculous, and honestly kind of genius. Whoever was behind this had managed to humiliate half the school and create a mystery we'd be talking about for years. As for the goldfish, I named mine Lucky and kept it on my nightstand until it died 3 weeks later. But even now, every time I see a goldfish, I can't help but wonder, who was behind it? And what was the point? Maybe it was just a prank. Or maybe, just maybe it was something bigger. Something we'll never understand. Here's the setup. It's 4 p.m. on a random Tuesday, and I'm ankle deep in a tide pool, arguing with a crab. Not a person acting crabby, a literal crab. I call him Mr. Pinch because he's got this bad attitude and keeps trying to grab my finger while I'm untangling a piece of fishing net from the rocks. I'm like, chill out, dude, I'm literally saving your house. But he's not having it. It's a normal day for me, really. I volunteer for this little marine rescue group, which basically means I spend most of my free time wrangling sea life or picking up trash that people leave behind like jerks. But right as I'm about to finish my shift, this kid comes running down the beach, yelling, "There's a fish with wings!" I freeze, because I know he's probably talking about some poor bird tangled in plastic or something, but my ocean nerd brain is like, wait, fish with wings? Could it be? So I grab my gear and follow the kid down to this rocky cove, and sure enough, there it is, a tiny flying fish stranded on the rocks. I'm losing my mind because flying fish don't usually hang out this close to shore, and this one looks pretty banged up, like it might have caught a bad wave or had a run-in with a seagull. It's flapping weakly, like it's trying to take off but can't get enough lift, and my heart just about breaks into a million pieces. All right, buddy, I say, scooping it up gently with my hands. Let's get you back in the game. Now, here's where things get weird. As I'm walking back to the water, this older guy shows up out of nowhere. He's wearing a bright yellow rain jacket, even though it hasn't rained in weeks, and he's got this salt and pepper beard that makes him look like he walked out of a Hemingway novel. He nods at the fish in my hands and says, "Ah, a glider. Haven't seen one of those in years." A glider. Like it's a personal friend of his. I blink at him, trying to decide if he's just some eccentric beach guy or if he actually knows what he's talking about. Before I can ask, he says, "You'll want to take it past the breakers. They need a good push to get back on their way." I don't know why, but something about the way he says it makes me trust him, like he's some kind of fish whisperer. So I wade out into the surf, carefully keeping the little guy in the water to let it breathe, and when I'm far enough out that the waves are tugging at my legs, I let it go. It hesitates for a second like it's testing the water, and then zoom. It takes off like a tiny torpedo, skipping across the surface before vanishing into the horizon. I'm standing there, grinning like an idiot, when I turn back to thank the guy. But guess what? He's gone. Just poof. Like he wasn't even real. I walk back to the beach, looking around for him, but all I find are some faint boot prints in the sand leading up to the dunes. Lily tells me later that he was probably just some quirky local, but I'm convinced he was a ghost. Or like an ocean spirit. I mean, who just knows random stuff about flying fish and then disappears without a trace. Anyway, I go home that night and Google flying fish folklore, because I can't let it go, and apparently there's this old sailor's legend that flying fish bring good luck if you help them return to the ocean. And you know what? That week was one of the best weeks of my life. I found $20 on the sidewalk, aced a marine biology exam I barely studied for, and got invited to this random art show where I met a guy who's now one of my best friends. Coincidence? Maybe. But part of me likes to think that little flying fish put in a good word for me with the universe. So, have you ever had a moment where something weird and magical happened, and you still can't explain it? Like something so random it felt like a sign? It's funny, the way a habit can start with something so small, so insignificant, you barely notice it. For us, it was a keychain. Not even a fancy one. Just a plain brass anchor, the kind you'd find at any gift shop along the coast. I bought it on a whim at the market downtown one afternoon, tossing it into my bag with some postcards and saltwater taffy, not knowing it would become, well, everything. Tina noticed it first. I'd left my keys on the counter when I came over for dinner, and she picked them up, running her thumb over the smooth metal. "This is cute," she said. "Very on-brand for you, Mr. Lighthouse." I laughed. Figured I'd embrace the cliche. She clipped it off the ring, tossing it in her palm like a coin. You know what it needs? A story. Anchors are supposed to mean something, right? Safety, stability, that kind of thing. I roll my eyes. It's a $3 keychain. I don't think it comes with lore. Well, then we'll give it some, she said, slipping it in her pocket like she'd just won a prize. The next morning, when I left her apartment, the anchor was back on my keyring, but it wasn't alone. Tied to it with a bit of red thread was a tiny shell, white and perfect, no bigger than a dime. I held it up, smiling, and she shrugged from the doorway. "It's your first charm," she said. "Think of it as a reminder to come back." And that was it. A silly little thing, really, but it stuck. Every week or so, Tina would add something new to the keychain. Something small, something she said felt right. A smooth piece of sea glass she found on a walk. A miniature starfish she swore was carved from driftwood. A button from her favorite sweater. Each charm came with a story. The sea glass is for calm days, she'd say. Or, the button's for luck, so you don't get swept out to sea. It wasn't long before I started adding charms too. A rusty nail I found at the base of the lighthouse, which she said was very brooding and poetic. A tiny brass bell from the old schooner museum in town. A faded key I'd picked up at a flea market because every good keychain needs a mystery, according to Tina. The thing grew heavy fast, too heavy for a pocket. But that was the point. By the time we moved in together, the keychain had become something more than keys. It was a map of us, a kind of living history. We hung it by the door, and every time we came or went, we'd rattle it, laugh about how ridiculous it was getting. The charms kept coming, even as life got busy, even as the shine of new love gave way to the steady rhythm of shared days. Tina would slip things into my pocket when I wasn't looking, a coin, a pebble, once even a tiny folded paper crane. For the collection, she'd say later, winking. I'd grumble about how the thing was going to break the hook, but secretly I loved it. Then one day, Tina showed up with an envelope in her hand, grinning like she had just solved a mystery. I found it, she said. Found what? She pulled out a tiny silver compass, no bigger than a penny, and held it up. The heart of the keychain. Every good map needs a compass, right? I smiled, reaching for it, but she pulled it back. Not so fast, sailor. This one comes with a rule. A rule. She nodded. If either of us ever gets too lost, like really, really lost, we have to come back here. To the keychain. Too lost for what? I asked, half laughing, half curious. She tilted her head, serious now. Too lost for everything. For us. For yourself. Whatever. I didn't know what to say to that, but I nodded and let her add the compass to the chain. It felt like a promise, though I couldn't tell you what kind. We kept that ritual for years. It became our thing. The adding, the storytelling, the rattling as we came home. The keychain grew so big we had to hang it on a hook in the hallway, next to the mirror where Tina always checked her lipstick before leaving. Guests would ask about it, and we'd laugh, trying to explain. It's just us, Tina would say, shrugging. But then came the storm. I don't mean an actual storm. I mean the kind that tears up your life, rips the floorboards out from under you. The kind you don't see coming, even when the air feels heavy and the sky turns strange. Tina and I stopped adding charms. Stopped talking, really, except in clipped sentences about groceries or bills. The anchor sat untouched on the hook, gathering dust, its weight feeling more like a burden than a history. One night, after a fight about something stupid, probably the dishes, she slammed the door behind her, and I stood in the empty hallway, staring at the keychain. I wanted to rip it down, to throw it into the ocean, but I couldn't. Instead, I took the compass off. Just a compass. I slipped it into my pocket and left, walking until the wind off the water made my face sting. For weeks, we barely spoke. Tina stayed at her sister's place, and I stayed in the house, pacing the floor trying to write, failing miserably. The compass stayed in my pocket the whole time. I'd take it out sometimes, roll it between my fingers, and wonder if we were both too lost to find our way back. Then one evening, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Tina standing there, shivering, her hands stuffed in her coat. She didn't say anything, just stepped inside, walked straight to the hallway, and picked up the anchor. She held it for a moment, running her fingers over the charms, and then looked at me. Do you still have the compass? I nodded, pulling it from my pocket. She smiled just barely. Good. Let's put it back. We didn't fix everything that night. It took time, patience, more storms. But the compass went back on the keychain, and the next morning, Tina slipped a new charm into my coffee mug, a little silver feather. She didn't explain it, and I didn't ask. It was just US finding our way again. So now I'm wondering, what's your anchor? What's the thing that keeps you steady, even when the storms... This morning, the sun didn't rise so much as it strolled. I'm talking leisurely, like it was carrying a newspaper under one arm and a coffee in the other. I watched it peek over the skyline with the kind of half smile that says, yeah, I'm late. You'll live. I would have chalked it up to bad sleep or the existential dread that's just part of the package deal in New York. But then my cat rolled over and said, "Looks like another lazy one, huh?" Now, let me be clear. My cat, Basil, is normally not much for conversation. He's more of a sit-and-judge type, the kind who knocks over your water just to remind you he could ruin your life if he felt like it. But this morning, he sat up on the pillow, yawned, and stretched like a college professor who's just about had it with your nonsense. "Don't look at me like that," he said, flicking his tail. "You're the one who put off the laundry again." I stared at him, slack-jawed, while he hopped off the bed and trotted toward the kitchen. I followed, half wondering if I'd actually woken up or if this was some extended fever dream brought on by cheap dumplings. "Are you coming or not?" Basil called over his shoulder. The weirdness didn't stop there. My coffee machine greeted me with a cheerful, "Mornin', boss," when I hit the button, and the coffee, always bitter, always slightly disappointing, came out tasting like it had been brewed by angels with advanced degrees in hospitality. Meanwhile, Basil lounged on the counter, licking a paw like he wasn't currently defying several laws of reality. "Is this a today thing, or forever?" I asked him. He blinked slowly. Define forever. That was not helpful. Outside, the city was its usual noisy self, but now it sounded intentional. A construction site clanged rhythmically, like a drumline warming up. The honks of taxi horns harmonized in perfect thirds. Even the garbage truck growled past with a satisfying rumble, like a bass note rounding out the chaos. A guy jogging by with a Bluetooth speaker had his music sync up with it all, and for a second, I felt like I was in a flash mob no one had invited me to. At the corner, a street vendor selling tamales gave me a knowing nod. "You're late," she said. "For what?" She smirked, handing me a tamale wrapped in corn husk that smelled like it had been kissed by the gods. "You'll figure it out." I took a bite, warm, buttery spice just right, and I swear it gave me an existential hug. I felt understood in a way therapy hadn't quite achieved. My first destination was the bookstore on 8th Street. Not for work, just because the owner, Mrs. Nguyen, is usually the kind of no-nonsense woman who'll tell you flat out if your reading taste is garbage. But today, she looked at me over her wire-rimmed glasses and said, "The poetry section is humming." "Humming?" I asked. She just nodded toward the back, where I found the shelves vibrating ever so slightly, as if they were tuned to some low frequency. I picked up a slim book of haikus, and the moment I cracked it open, the words spilled out like whispered secrets. Not in a metaphorical, "Oh, this book spoke to me" way, but in an actual, "Hey, let me tell you something you didn't know about yourself" way. I left with 3 books and a new understanding of why I always cry during dog commercials. By lunch, things were reaching peak absurdity. At my favorite bagel shop, the usual grumpy guy behind the counter looked me dead in the eye and said, "You want sesame today?" "Trust me, I was going to get everything," I protested. He tapped his temple. "Sesame. I know things." "Fine." Sesame it was. When I bit into it, it was like the bagel had been engineered for my taste buds alone. Soft, chewy, the exact right ratio of cream cheese to everything else. I took a second bite and could almost hear the bagel whisper, "See? Told you." The subway ride home was where the day really went off the rails. Everyone in the car was reading each other's minds, silently, politely, as if this was just the way things were now. I sat across from a woman who was staring out the window, and her thoughts drifted into mine like radio static. "Don't forget eggs, and also, maybe tell Brian you actually like him." Brian? Who was Brian? Did she know she was broadcasting? I tried to think back at her. "Tell him. He seems nice." And she snapped her head toward me, wide-eyed. Then she grinned. At my stop, a guy with a cello slung over his shoulder was standing on the platform, staring down the tracks. He looked at me as I passed and said, "Careful. The pigeons are scheming again." "Scheming?" I echoed. He nodded solemnly. "They always are." By the time I got home, my head was buzzing with everything. The talking cat, the symphonic city noise, the tamale of emotional clarity. Basil was lounging on the couch, swishing his tail like a king who'd just reclaimed his throne. "So, what do we think?" he asked casually. "About what?" "This whole thing." He waved a paw vaguely, encompassing the room, the world, existence itself. I think I'm just rolling with it, I said. He purred approvingly. Good call. And now, here I am, typing this up while Basil naps on my keyboard. The toaster just let out a happy little ding, even though it's unplugged, and I've decided I'm not questioning it. So tell me, Reddit, what would you do if your life went from normal to whatever this is overnight? Would you talk to your cat? Trust a psychic bagel guy? Or maybe listen to the pigeons and find out what they've been plotting all along? They always say, it's the thought that counts. Whoever they are has clearly never been on a date with someone like Matt. No, let me backtrack. It wasn't Matt. It was me. I let this stuff happen. I have this gift, or maybe it's a curse, of seeing the best in people, even when they're practically wearing neon signs that scream, red flag, run. The first time Matt and I talked, it was at this dive bar downtown. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be at home, eating microwave mac and cheese and binging true crime documentaries. But my best friend, Zoe, practically dragged me out, saying I needed fresh air and fresh men. Matt was the bartender. Tall, a little scruffy, with a tattoo of some constellation peeking out from under his rolled-up sleeves. He made Zoe and me some ridiculous cocktail called a Cosmic Slap, which was basically purple Kool-Aid with tequila. I didn't even like it, but I drank it anyway because he kept smiling at me every time he walked by. Bartenders always flirt for tips, Zoe warned, but I was already half sold. He wrote his number on the back of my receipt with a little doodle of a spaceship. How do you resist that? Spoiler alert, you don't. Our first date was chaotic, to put it nicely. He took me to this indie film screening in someone's garage. Not a cool art studio, an actual garage. There was a cat walking across the screen, which was just a bedsheet duct taped to the wall. At one point, the projector overheated, and we all sat in the dark while the host handed out cold pizza slices. And honestly, I kind of loved it. It felt like an adventure. Matt kept making these snarky comments under his breath, and I laughed so hard I almost choked on my pizza. After that, we were inseparable, or so I thought. He wasn't just fun, he was different. He played guitar, but refused to call himself a musician. He read sci-fi novels with dog-eared pages and let me borrow his favorite one, The Stars Are Fire. I didn't understand half of it, but I kept reading because he cared so much about it. The cracks started showing about a month in. Little things, like how he'd cancel plans last minute with these vague excuses. Something came up, or I'm just not feeling it tonight. He'd disappear for days, then reappear with some grand gesture. A mixtape, a handwritten note, or once a bag of gummy worms because I'd mentioned I liked them that one time. And every time I started to pull away, he'd reel me back in with this boyish charm like, don't give up on me yet, okay? I'm a work in progress. He even joked once, you're like my accountability partner. At the time I thought, he'd trust me. Looking back, I realized, no dude, I'm not your unpaid therapist. The breaking point came on my birthday. He promised to make it the best day ever. And I, like the idiot I am, believed him. I canceled plans with Zoe because Matt wanted to surprise me. He showed up 3 hours late with a half-eaten cupcake and some story about helping a friend move. He didn't even say whose birthday it was until I brought it up. I just sat there, staring at him, trying to figure out if I was angry or just tired. Do you even want to be here? I asked. Of course, he said, mouth full of cupcake. Why would you even ask that? And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a relationship. It was a guessing game, and I was exhausted. I broke up with him 2 days later over text, which I know sounds bad, but trust me, it was the kindest thing I could have done. He sent me this long, guilt-trippy response about how he never meant to let me down, and how he wasn't good at this whole relationship thing. No epaledi. Just excuses. It's been 6 months since Matt, and I've sworn off men who describe themselves as a little broken, but worth it. You're not a fixer-upper. You're a person. Go fix yourself before dragging someone else into your mess. Now, I spend most of my nights exactly how I wanted to spend the night I met him. Eating mac and cheese and watching true crime documentaries. Zoe calls it the hermit life, but honestly, it's peaceful. No more guessing games. No more overthinking every text. Just me, a warm blanket, and a guilty pleasure for murder mysteries. Sometimes, I'll catch myself wondering what Matt's up to. Then I remember probably still writing his number on receipts for someone else to fix him. And you know what? That's not my problem anymore. It's a perfectly average Wednesday, and I'm in the middle of doing what I call my creative reset, which is a fancy way of saying I'm people watching at the park instead of working. I've got my sketchbook out, pretending I'm going to draw something profound, but really, I'm just doodling tiny frogs and hats. The sun's warm, there's a breeze, life is good. That's when he shows up, this scruffy, chaotic-looking guy in a trench coat that's seen better days. He's got this huge backpack that clinks when he moves like it's full of loose metal or maybe a DIY robot project gone horribly wrong. He plops himself onto the bench next to me, uninvited, and pulls out this battered lunchbox that looks like it survived a fire. "Do you believe in magic?" he asks mid-bite of what might be the saddest PB&J I've ever seen. I blink at him. Not really. Why? He doesn't answer right away. Just chews thoughtfully, like I've said something deeply disappointing. Then he pulls something out of his backpack, a crumpled brown envelope, and drops it onto my lap. "Hold this for a second," he says. "I'll be right back." Before I can ask what the hell is going on, he's gone. Like gone. 1 second he's there. The next he's a distant silhouette disappearing into the trees. I glance down at the envelope. It's thick, heavier than it looks, with no writing on it except for my name, scrawled in sloppy block letters. Which, excuse me, how does he even know my name? Now, every part of my logical brain is telling me to leave it alone. Toss it in the trash. Pretend this whole weird exchange didn't happen. But of course, I do the opposite because apparently I have no survival instincts. I peel open the envelope and dump the contents into my hand. It's the keychain. A stupid little plastic keychain shaped like a vending machine. It's one of those old school ones with a tiny crank you can turn, and it makes that satisfying click, click, click sound. There's also a slip of paper folded into a perfect square. I unfold it, and it just says, "Use wisely. 1 token per wish." Now, I've seen enough weird indie movies to know that messing with stuff like this usually ends in disaster. But it's a vending machine keychain. How dangerous could it be? So I twist the crank. There's a faint hum, like the world's smallest generator powering up. The keychain shakes in my hand, and then out pops a tiny red plastic capsule, the kind you get from those 25-cent machines at the grocery store. I unscrew it, and inside is a token, small, shiny, and cold to the touch, like it's been pulled straight from the Arctic. And here's where things get wild. The second I touch the token, this voice echoes in my head. Not my voice, mind you, but this smooth, almost robotic tone. "State your wish." I freeze. My first thought is that this is some kind of elaborate prank. My second thought is, well, if it's real, maybe I should test it. So I say, out loud, "I wish I had a donut." Instantly, there's a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising off asphalt. And then poof, there's a donut in my lap. Not just any donut, a warm, perfectly glazed masterpiece that smells like it was just pulled from the oven. I stare at it for a solid minute before taking a bite. It's real, delicious even. My hands are shaking, partly because of the sugar rush, but mostly because holy crap, the keychain worked. Naturally, I start testing its limits. I wish for a $100 bill. Poof! It lands on the bench next to me, crisp and fresh. I wish for my phone battery to be fully charged. Poof! The little icon jumps to 100%. I wish for a puppy, but apparently, that's too big a wish for 1 token. The keychain buzzes angrily, like it's scolding me. This is when it hits me. I have 1 wish per token. And when I check the envelope, there are exactly 10 tokens left. Now, this is where things get tricky. I mean, sure, I could use the rest of the tokens for random stuff, more donuts, maybe a plane ticket to Tokyo, but something about the use wisely note keeps nagging at me. It feels important, like the universe is giving me a cheat code, but not telling me what game I'm playing. So I sit there, staring at this dumb little keychain, trying to decide if I should call my therapist or just go full goblin mode and wish for a lifetime supply of burritos. That's when the trench coat guy comes back, completely out of breath and holding what looks like an ancient compass. "Still got the tokens?" he asks, eyes darting around like he's expecting ninjas to jump out of the bushes. "Yeah," I say. "What's the deal with this thing?" He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he takes a long, dramatic pause, like he's rehearsing his lines. "It's part of something bigger," he says finally. "A game, kind of. The tokens? They're shortcuts. The vending machine gives you what you want, but not what you need. Be careful with it. And before I can press him for details, he's gone again, like some kind of mystical Houdini. Just poof, no smoke, no sparkles, just empty air where a man once stood. So now I'm back in my apartment, keychain in hand, staring at these shiny little tokens and trying to decide what the hell to do. Should I save them for emergencies? Try to break the system and wish for something clever like infinite tokens? Or just lean into the chaos and see where it takes me? Anyway, if you had 10 wishes and a vending machine that could grant them, but only if you didn't overthink it, what would you wish for? Also, side note, does anyone know if you can return a magic item? Because this thing is starting to feel like way too much responsibility for a girl who can't even keep a succulent alive. It was a bag of grapes. A stupid, ordinary bag of grapes. I wasn't even supposed to be at that Safeway. I usually shop at the co-op down the street. Less fluorescent lighting, better energy. But I was running late for a class, and my boyfriend had eaten the last of the fruit I'd packed for the week. So there I was, staring at the display like the grapes might rearrange themselves into a sign telling me what to do with my life. I reached for a bag, and that's when it happened. A song came on over the store speakers. Shiny, happy people holding hands. Oh, my God, REM. I hadn't heard that song in years, but the moment it started, I felt my insides drop like an elevator hitting the basement. I was 10 again, sitting in the back seat of my mom's old blue Volvo, legs sticking to the vinyl because she refused to turn on the AC unless it was over 90 degrees. The song played from the cassette deck, slightly wore lie, because my mom had dubbed it herself from the radio. She had this thing about not buying corporate music, though somehow stealing it was fine. In the memory, it was summer, and we were on our way to the farmer's market. Not the fancy kind with artisanal goat cheese samples. This was the gritty, no-frills kind with mud on the carrots and vendors who didn't smile. My mom loved it there. She'd always park us in the farthest possible spot and call it a bonus walk. I hated those walks. I hated the smell of the market, too. A weird mix of dirt and overripe fruit and sweaty people crammed together under tarps. But I loved the cassette tapes. Mom was obsessed with making mixtapes, and she named them all, too. This one was called Road Trip Sunshine. It was her favorite. I could still hear her voice singing along in her half-off key, half not really trying way. She didn't know the words, so she'd just mumble until the chorus came, then shout shiny, happy people, while pointing at me and my brother like we were supposed to join in. Back in Safeway, my hand was still frozen on the grapes. I swear, I could almost smell the inside of that Volvo. That faint, chemical tang of air freshener shaped like a tree mixed with the warm, plasticky stink of the dashboard baking in the sun. And just like that, I wasn't 33 anymore. I wasn't a yoga teacher who knew how to breathe through her feelings or lean into the moment. I was a sweaty little kid with Velcro sneakers and a tangled ponytail, squished between a bag of lettuce and my brother, who kept elbowing me just to be annoying. I'd give anything to go back to that car. To feel the way I felt then, when life was nothing but mixtapes and bickering with my brother and hating how my mom never bought the sugary cereal like everyone else's mom. I don't even know what happened to those tapes. Maybe they disappeared with the Volvo when Mom sold it to that guy from her book club who promised to take care of it but probably didn't. The song hit its chorus, and I felt this ridiculous lump rising in my throat. Over grapes. Over a song. I started laughing a little, but it wasn't the funny kind of laugh. It was the kind you do when your emotions are tangled up in a way you can't untangle. And then, because the universe likes to be extra, some kid came running past me, dragging his dad toward the cookie aisle. The dad was laughing and saying, all right, but just one box. The kid looked up at him with this goofy, toothy grin like his dad had just promised him the moon. And bam, there was me and my mom again, haggling over whether I could get a popsicle from the market. She'd always say no at first, then pretend to change her mind, like she was doing me a favor. I didn't cry, okay? Let's just get that clear. But I did have to take a deep breath before I bagged those grapes and made my way to checkout. By the time I got to the car, the song was stuck in my head. I sat there for a minute, still holding my keys, humming under my breath. And you know what? I called my mom. We didn't talk long. She was busy digging out the dandelions in her backyard, but I told her I'd heard the song, and she just laughed and said, "Oh, that was a great mixtape, wasn't it?" Like she'd just been thinking about it yesterday, like no time had passed at all. And for a second, it felt like it hadn't. So yeah, thanks to REM and a bag of overpriced grapes, I ended up spending my whole drive to class thinking about sticky car rides and cassette tapes and my mom singing words she didn't know. What about you? What tiny, stupid thing, like a song or a smell, has completely ambushed you and thrown you back into a memory you didn't even know you still had? I was sitting in traffic the other day, staring at the bumper of the car in front of me, when I saw it. One of those baby on board stickers. You know, the kind, the little yellow diamond that's been around since the 80s. But this one had a twist. Instead of baby on board, it read, "Adults on board. We want to live too." I snorted so hard my coffee nearly shot out my nose. I thought, you know what? Fair point. As the car inched forward, I couldn't stop thinking about how signs like that are everywhere now, but they've evolved into a kind of low-key public commentary. You've got the classics. "My kid's an honor student. Great, Karen. Good for your kid." And then the rebels who fight back with "My kid beat up your honor student." Now it's all about irony. I saw one the other day that said, "Powered by coffee and poor life choices." I wanted to roll down my window and yell, "Same buddy." It hit me then, sitting in traffic, how even the tiniest things, like what we slap on the back of our cars, are little mirrors of the times we live in. Once upon a time, people just put bumper stickers about their favorite radio station or where they went on vacation. Now, it's a personality test. Are you the dog mom type? The weird and proud type? Or maybe the "please don't tailgate me, I'm already stressed enough" type? I'm somewhere between weird and proud and "please don't tailgate." I don't have stickers on my car, but if I did, they'd probably say something like, "Ask me about obscure Revolutionary War facts," or "honk if you've ever emotionally overinvested in a historical documentary." Anyway, once I got out of traffic, I started thinking about other little ways we express ourselves now, like personalized playlists. Remember making mixtapes? There was an art to that. You had to time it just right, hit the record button without catching the DJ's voice, and pray the tape didn't unravel. Now, you just drag and drop songs into Spotify, but the intention is still there. Here's a little map of my soul in 15 tracks or less. I made a playlist for my students once, just as an experiment. I called it "The Sounds of History" and tried to match songs to historical moments. Fortunate Son for Vietnam, Born in the USA for Reagan's America. You get the idea. One of my students, Eric, raised his hand and said, "Miss L, this playlist slaps, but why is there a sad Taylor Swift song under the Great Depression?" I told him, because, Eric, nothing screams economic despair like a ballad about losing it all. They didn't stop roasting me about it for weeks. But the thing is, they got it. They remembered the songs, and they remembered the history. And isn't that kind of amazing? That we use the same tools, music, stickers, even memes, to connect and share what we care about? The delivery changes, but the heart of it doesn't. Take my niece, for example. She's 15, fluent in sarcasm, and convinced she's way cooler than I ever was. She's not wrong. Last summer, she came over for a sleepover, and we ended up watching old home movies. At first, she was glued to her phone, half watching while texting her friends. But then we got to a video of my 8th birthday party, me with braces, bad bangs, and a Lisa Frank cake. She put her phone down and said, "Wait, this is kind of iconic." I laughed so hard I nearly cried. Iconic? It was a disaster. But she wasn't being ironic. She meant it. To her, this grainy VHS from the 90s was like finding buried treasure. And that's when it hit me. Nostalgia is always someone else's discovery. My niece sees magic in my awkward childhood the same way I swoon over vintage diners or Polaroid cameras. What we throw away, the next generation picks up and says, "Hey, this is cool. Can we bring it back?" Even technology has that pattern. The other day, I overheard 2 of my students arguing about which era had the best phones. One kid said the iPhone 6 was peak vibes, while the other swore by the Nokia brick. You could throw that thing, and it wouldn't even crack, they said, like it was some lost relic from ancient times. I jumped in and said, there was a time when phones were just phones. No apps, no cameras. The horror on their faces was priceless. "What did you even do with them?" one asked. "Talk," I said, smirking. "Sometimes we even wrote letters. On paper." And here's the wild part. They weren't dismissive. They were fascinated. One kid asked if I knew how to write in cursive, like it was an exotic skill. Another wanted to know if people still mailed postcards. I realized in that moment how much we take for granted when we're living it. For them, texting and TikTok are just air. They don't notice it until someone points it out. For me, it was calling my best friend on the family landline and hoping my dad didn't pick up first. Same need to connect, different tools. So yeah, life's a series of bumper stickers. Some are loud, some are ironic, and some are quietly sincere. They're little signals we send out to the world, hoping someone will notice and think, hey, me too. What's your bumper sticker moment? What's that one small, silly thing that feels like your time capsule? I'd love to hear it. Maybe it'll end up on my imaginary playlist, right next to Taylor Swift and the Great Depression. It's funny how you can live in the same neighborhood for years and never notice a place until life decides to point it out. For me, that place was Gino's Shoe Repair, a little hole-in-the-wall shop wedged between a laundromat and a bodega that sells sandwiches so greasy you need a nap halfway through eating one. I'd walked past Gino's a million times without thinking twice. Just a faded sign, a dusty window, and the faint smell of leather drifting onto the sidewalk. But last Thursday, I found myself standing in front of it, holding a pair of boots that had seen better days and wondering if it was even worth saving them. Now, these weren't just any boots. These were the boots I wore the first time I did stand up. The boots I had on when I landed my first paid gig, $1.25 and a drink ticket, but still, they had history. And frankly, they were also the only decent shoes I owned that didn't scream, I'm a guy who lives in Brooklyn and survives off bagels and irony. But after years of stomping through puddles, snow, and spilled beer, they were toast, cracked soles, peeling leather, and a smell I'd rather not describe. I pushed open the door, and a bell jingled above me. The shop was as tiny as it looked from the outside, crammed with shelves of old shoes and tools that looked like they hadn't been replaced since the 70s. Behind the counter stood Gino himself, a short, stocky guy with a face like a weathered baseball glove. He looked up from a pair of sneakers he was stitching together and squinted at me like I'd interrupted something important. Help you, he asked in that gruff, no-nonsense tone that every New Yorker over 50 seems to master. I held up the boots. Think these can be saved? He took them from me without a word, turning them over like he was inspecting a crime scene. After a long pause, he said, these boots been through a war? Kind of, I said. Comedy clubs mostly. Arguably worse. That got a small, grudging smile out of him. He set the boots on the counter and said, come back tomorrow. I'll see what I can do. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just handed over my boots, said thanks, and left. But the next day, when I walked back into the shop, something unexpected happened. Gino wasn't just holding my boots. He was sitting behind the counter polishing them by hand. And when I say polishing, I mean polishing. These weren't my beat-up, beer-soaked boots anymore. They looked new. Better than new, actually. Like they'd been reborn as the boots they were always meant to be. Wow, I said, genuinely impressed. You're like the shoe whisperer. Gino grunted, which I took as his way of saying thank you. He set the boots on the counter and said, you know, people don't fix things anymore. They just throw them out and buy new ones. I nodded, not really sure where he was going with this. Yeah, I guess that's true. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his stubbly chin. You know why I fix shoes? It's not the money. It's not even the shoes. It's the story. The story? I asked. Every pair of shoes tells one, he said, gesturing to the shelves behind him. You walk through life in them, they go everywhere you go. And when they break, it's like a part of your story is worn out. My job's to help people keep walking. Now I know how this sounds, like some kind of cheesy monologue from a Hallmark movie. But in the moment, standing in that dusty little shop with the smell of leather and polish hanging in the air, it didn't feel cheesy. It felt true. I told him about my boots, how I'd worn them for every gig, every audition, every awkward first date, how I'd almost thrown them out because I thought they were too far gone. And he just nodded like he'd heard it all before. See, he said, that's what I'm talking about. A story. And now you get to keep walking. I walked out of there feeling weirdly inspired, like maybe I'd stumbled onto some hidden wisdom in the most unlikely place. I put the boots on right away, even though they didn't match the jeans I was wearing, and went straight to an open mic. My set that night wasn't great. Half the crowd was more interested in their phones than my jokes, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to kill. I was there to keep walking. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other broken shoes in my life. Old jokes I'd given up on, projects I'd shelved because they didn't seem worth the effort. I started pulling them out, dusting them off, and trying again. And you know what? Some of them were still crap. But some of them worked. Like really worked. I think about Gino a lot now. About how he spent decades in that tiny shop, fixing things people didn't think were worth saving. About how he saw something in my boots that I couldn't see myself. And about how maybe, just maybe, we could all use a little Gino in our lives. Someone to remind us that just because something's broken doesn't mean it's useless. Ever have a moment like that? Where someone or something completely ordinary hits you with a life lesson you didn't even know you needed? Because let me tell you, I've been wearing those boots everywhere lately, and every time I lace them up, it's like they're telling me, keep going, kid. The story's not over yet. It's a Wednesday afternoon. Austin's having one of those weeks where the weather can't decide between bake everything alive and flash flood watch, and I'm standing in the aisle of a Home Depot, arguing with a complete stranger about light bulbs. This wasn't just a casual disagreement, by the way. This was a full-blown, animated debate about the merits of warm light versus cool light. And this guy? Let's call him Dan. Short for Dan, the destroyer of my sanity. At the time, I didn't know his name, of course. All I knew was that he was this wiry dude with a man bun, ripped jeans, and an attitude like he was on a mission to prove everyone else wrong. He had the kind of voice that somehow sounded both condescending and bored, like he was auditioning to play hipster barista number 3 in an indie movie. It started because I was minding my own business, staring at the shelves, trying to decide if I wanted my living room to feel like a cozy hobbit hole or a spaceship. And this guy just strolls up, grabs a pack of bulbs, and says, "You're overthinking it. Cool light's the only real option unless you want your place to look like a grandmother's basement." I don't know why, but something about that comment hit me right in my introvert soul. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of a stranger judging my theoretical lighting aesthetic. Maybe it was the way he said grandmother's basement, like it was the worst insult he could think of. Either way, I fired back with, "Cool light makes everything look like a hospital. Warm light feels like actual human beings live there." And just like that, it was on. For the next 10 minutes, we had this absurd back and forth about mood versus functionality, authenticity versus practicality, and whether Edison bulbs were a vibe or a cliche. At one point, I may have yelled, "My plants don't care about your minimalist Instagram aesthetic." And he shot back, "If you're taking lighting advice from houseplants, I've already won this argument." I walked out of that Home Depot muttering to myself, swearing that if I ever saw this guy again, I'd pretend I didn't recognize him. Because who has the energy for people like that? Not me. Definitely not me. Except life had other plans. Fast forward 2 weeks. My buddy Max invites me to his backyard barbecue. One of those bring-your-own everything deals where the only thing provided is questionable playlists and maybe some folding chairs if you're lucky. I show up with a 6-pack of Shiner and my world-famous, world-tolerated, guacamole, and guess who's already there? Holding court by the grill? Yup, damn the light bulb guy. I tried to avoid him. I really did. But Austin isn't that big a town, and apparently, Max thought we'd hit it off because he marched me right over and said, "Dan, meet Leo. You guys are both into games, right?" Cue the most awkward pause of my life. Dan blinked at me, tilted his head like he was trying to place me, and then said, "Wait, light bulb guy." I don't know what possessed me, but I just deadpanned, "Cool light supremacy." And he laughed, like this big surprise belly laugh that made everyone around us look over. Okay, he said, grinning. "Truce. For now." What I didn't expect was how easy it was to actually talk to him after that. Once we got past the initial snark, Dan turned out to be hilarious in this dry, self-aware way. He started telling me about how he was designing this weird, experimental game where you play as a ghost trying to haunt memories back into your own forgotten life. I told him about my plant care sim, and we ended up geeking out over environmental storytelling and the art of creating games that make people feel something. By the end of the night, we completely hijacked Max's Bluetooth speaker to trade playlists, debated whether Telltale's The Walking Dead was a masterpiece or overrated, and formed an impromptu team for backyard trivia. We lost, but only because Dan insisted that Pluto still counts as a planet. Which, yeah, that's a whole other story. After that, Dan kind of stuck around. We started meeting up at coffee shops to brainstorm game ideas, which usually devolved into us roasting each other's concepts. Your ghost game needs more puzzles, less pretension, I'd say. Your plant game needs more stakes, less fertilizer, he'd shoot back. He dragged me to my first outdoor concert. I got him hooked on D&D. Somewhere along the way, this guy I couldn't stand became one of the most important people in my life. The funny thing is, Dan still drives me nuts sometimes. He's one of those people who has an opinion on everything, and he'll argue it like his life depends on it. Even if it's something as dumb as the correct way to slice a bagel, vertically, apparently, which is chaos. But for every annoying habit, there's 10 things I love about the guy. His ridiculous enthusiasm, his sharp-as-hell wit, and the way he can somehow make you believe in your own crazy ideas just by being excited about them. So yeah, I thought Dan was a pain in the ass, but now, he's my creative partner, my go-to for late-night, overcooked marathons, and probably the best friend I've ever had. Turns out, sometimes the people who challenge you the most are exactly the ones you need in your life. Have you ever had someone go from worst person ever to ride or die? Because, man, it's wild when it happens. This morning started like any other. Me sitting on the stoop outside my shotgun house, the air thick and slow, smelling of magnolia and last night's rain. My old dog, Rufus, was sprawled out beside me, belly up and snoring like a freight train. It was a regular Tuesday, or so I thought, until I saw him. This guy roller skating down the street in a full three-piece suit, bright red with white pinstripes, a cane twirling in his hand like he just stepped out of a cartoon. Now, I've lived in New Orleans my whole life, and let me tell you, I thought I'd seen it all. But this fellow was something else. He was gliding like butter on a hot skillet, smooth as a sax solo on a summer night. His hat, wide-brimmed and feathered, sat perched at an angle that said, "I don't just skate, I float." And the man wasn't alone. Behind him, there was a kid, couldn't have been more than 10, trying to keep up on an old beat-up bike. Logan so hard he nearly fell off. I didn't mean to stare, but who could blame me? The guy caught my eye, tipped his hat, and said, "Mornin', brother. Life's too short to walk when you can roll. You feel me?" Then he spun around in a perfect circle and kept on going, leaving me there with my coffee halfway to my lips and Rufus lifting his head like he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. That got me thinking about how this city has a way of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. I mean, where else can you find a man in a suit skating down a cracked asphalt road like he's late for a jazz funeral? Where else does every day feel like it's got the potential for a parade, even when nothing's planned? New Orleans don't just let you exist. It makes you live. It's a place where folks reinvent themselves 100 times before breakfast and nobody bats an eye. Later, I wandered down to Jackson Square with my harmonica, figuring I'd play a few tunes and see what the day had in store. The tourists were out in full force, snapping pictures of the cathedral and buying pralines from the cart lady who always sings like she's auditioning for a gospel choir. But what caught my attention wasn't the usual hustle. It was a group of kids sitting cross-legged on the pavement, drawn with chalk. At first, I thought they were sketching the usual stuff, flowers, hearts, maybe a sun with a goofy smile. But as I got closer, I realized these kids were creating a whole scene, like a street mural come to life. There was a jazz band, complete with a trumpet player and a drummer banging on a trash can. There were people dancing, their chalk arms raised like they could hear the music. And in the middle of it all, there was the roller skating man in his red suit, big as life, with his cane in the air like a conductor leading an invisible orchestra. One of the kids looked up and saw me watching. "You know him?" she asked, her voice curious, her fingers smudged with red and blue. "Not exactly," I said, kneeling down to get a better look. "But I saw him this morning. He's got style, doesn't he?" The girl nodded, grinning as she added a little feather to his hat. "He's like a superhero or something. My dad says he skates by every week, always smiling." "Maybe that's his superpower," I said, spreading smiles. The kids laughed, but I wasn't joking. There was something about that man, the way he moved like the world couldn't weigh him down, that felt like a kind of magic. And the fact that these kids were sitting here, immortalizing him in chalk, made me think about how we all leave marks on the streets we walk or skate down. Some are big, loud, and impossible to miss. Others are quiet, like a melody that sneaks into your head and lingers long after you've forgotten where you heard it. By the time the sun started to set in, the chalk drawings were smeared from a dozen feet walking over them, but I couldn't shake the image of that man in red, rolling through the city like it was his own personal stage. As I packed up my harmonica and headed home, I wondered what his story was. Was he just a regular guy who decided to add a little flair to his morning commute? Or was there more to it? Some heartbreak he was skating away from, or a dream he was chasing with every graceful spin? It's funny how someone you only see for a second can stick with you like that. Makes you realize how many stories are out there, floating around like notes in the air, just waiting for someone to catch them. What about you? Ever see someone who made you stop and think? What's their deal? Or maybe it was something you did yourself, some small act that turned into a bigger story than you expected. Whatever it was, I bet it left a mark. You know that saying, no good deed goes unpunished. Yeah, well, I learned the hard way that it's not just a clever phrase, it's a curse. It started on a Wednesday, which was already off to a bad start because I spilled coffee on my shirt 5 minutes before a meeting. I had to throw on this wrinkled spare I keep in my car, making me look like I just crawled out of a donation bin. Anyway, after work, I decided to stop by the grocery store because my fridge was basically a graveyard of expired condiments and a single slice of cheese. I was at the self-checkout, minding my own business, when I heard someone muttering angrily a few feet away. This guy, mid-40s maybe, was jabbing at the screen like it had personally insulted him. He looked like he was one error message away from committing a crime against the machine. Now, normally, I wouldn't get involved, but something about his frustration struck a chord. Maybe it was the way his face turned an unnatural shade of red, or maybe I was just tired of watching people lose their minds over barcodes. So, like an idiot, I walked over and said, "Hey, need a hand?" At first, he didn't even look at me, just kept stabbing the screen and growling. "It's not scanning." I've tried 100 times. I glanced at his cart. It was full of random stuff. Paper towels, canned beans, a frozen pizza that was half melted. The item in his hand was a bag of oranges, the kind that always refuses to scan without divine intervention. "Let me try," I offered, taking the bag. Big mistake. As soon as I scanned the oranges, the machine announced in the loudest voice imaginable, "Unexpected item in bagging area." It felt like the entire store stopped to stare at us. The guy groaned like I'd just ruined his entire life. "See," he said, throwing his hands up. "It's broken." I was about to suggest moving to another register when a woman, probably in her 60s, appeared out of nowhere. She had one of those stern, no-nonsense faces that made me stand up straighter on instinct. "Is there a problem?" she asked, glaring at me like I was some kind of grocery delinquent. "No problem," I said quickly. This machine hates me," the guy interrupted, pointing at the screen like it was a personal vendetta. The woman sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Let me fix it," she said, reaching over to tap some buttons. At that point, I should have walked away, but something about the situation was too absurd to leave. I mean, how often do you find yourself in a 3-person battle with a checkout machine? Finally, the oranges scanned properly, and the guy muttered a half-hearted thanks before storming off. The woman turned to me, arms crossed. "Next time, let the employees handle it," she said, like I'd just been caught smuggling contraband. "Noted," I replied, backing away before she could add me to some grocery store blacklist. I thought that was the end of it, but oh no. Fate wasn't done with me yet. On my way to the parking lot, I heard a voice call out, "Hey, you forgot this." I turned around to see the orange guy jogging toward me, holding a reusable bag. For a second, I was touched. Maybe he wasn't as grumpy as I thought. But then he shoved the bag into my hands and said, "You left it in the cart." I looked inside. "It wasn't mine." "This isn't." I started, but he was already halfway across the lot, waving like he'd just done me the biggest favor of my life. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked inside. It was a random assortment of items. A single zucchini, a can of tuna, and a package of balloons shaped like dinosaurs. I stood there for a good 30 seconds, debating whether to chase him down, but then I figured, you know what? This is his problem now. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I left the bag on top of his car, got into mine, and drove home. When I got back, I told my roommate the whole story, expecting him to laugh or at least shake his head in disbelief. Instead, he said, "Wait, did you keep the balloons?" "No," I said, horrified. "Why would I?" "Because now you'll never know why he needed them," he said, grinning like he'd just uncovered the meaning of life. And damn it, now I can't stop thinking about it. What was he planning to do with dinosaur balloons and a single zucchini? Was it some kind of weird party theme? A Pinterest project gone wrong? I'll never know. So yeah, moral of the story: no good deed goes unpunished. And sometimes curiosity really does kill the cat, or at least leaves you questioning the life choices of random strangers. When I woke up today, I wasn't in my bed. That was the first weird thing. I wasn't even in my house. I was on a mountain. No trailhead signs, no crumpled map, just me barefoot, standing in soft grass that felt like a thick, warm carpet. It was sunrise, but the sun wasn't just rising. It was painting. Big, sweeping strokes of pinks and oranges, brighter and bolder with every second, as if the sky was a canvas it just couldn't wait to fill. I should have been panicking. Instead, I was calm, like waking up in a strange place was just fine, comfortable even. My mismatched socks were hanging off the branch of a tree nearby, swaying like they were having a casual conversation. That's when I noticed my shirt and pants folded neatly on a rock, with my boots beside them. And my boots? They were tapping rhythmically against the stone, like they had somewhere to be. "Finally up, are we?" said the left boot, its tone brisk, no nonsense. "Took him long enough," grumbled the right one. "Where am I?" I asked, still not entirely sure if I was dreaming or if I'd been transported by a particularly cheeky mountain spirit. The tree beside me sighed, its leaves shuffling in irritation. Always the same questions with your kind. Where am I? How did I get here? What's going on? You humans never start with the interesting questions. "Okay," I said, crossing my arms. "What's an interesting question then?" The tree paused, clearly not expecting me to play along. After a moment, its branches swayed thoughtfully. "Well, for starters, you could ask what the grass thinks of you standing on it." I glanced down. The grass didn't look any different from regular grass, but then I felt it, a gentle vibration under my feet, like a purring cat. "We don't mind," said the grass in a collective whisper, "but you could wiggle your toes a bit." "That feels nice." I wiggled my toes. The grass sighed contentedly. By this point, I'd stopped trying to understand what was happening and decided to just roll with it. I grabbed my socks off the tree branch, and they immediately launched into an argument about which one of them was more essential to my personality. "I'm the fun sock," declared the one with tiny pine trees printed on it. "You're tacky," countered the plain brown one. "I'm the dependable one." I ground him. "You're boring," snapped Pine Tree Sock. "You're immature." "All right, that's enough," I said, pulling them on. "Both of you are going on this ride together, so figure it out." My boots, now firmly on my feet, let out simultaneous grunts of approval as I stood. "Not bad. Could use a bit more arch support," the left boot muttered, but the right one was already pointing toward a narrow dirt path winding into the forest. "Let's move," it said. "Move where?" The right boot didn't answer, but the tree waved a branch in the same direction. "You'll figure it out. Or not. Doesn't really matter." As I walked, the forest came alive in a way I'd never seen before. The trees whispered secrets to each other, their leaves shaking with conspiratorial giggles. The rocks underfoot grumbled with every step, but didn't seem too upset about being stepped on. A stream I crossed made a point of splashing me, its voice bubbly and teasing. "Careful there," it chirped. "You don't want to fall in. Or maybe you do. Depends on how much you like cold water." The deeper I went, the more surreal things got. A fox trotted up beside me at one point, its fur shimmering like liquid gold. It didn't say anything out loud, but I swear I heard it in my head. "Not bad for a human. But your balance is terrible." Then it bounded off, tail flicking like a punctuation mark. I kept walking until I reached a clearing where the air felt heavier, thicker, like I was standing in the center of something important. A massive boulder sat in the middle, smooth and ancient, with strange markings carved into its surface. "Took you long enough," rumbled the boulder, its voice deep and slow, like the earth itself was speaking. "To do what?" I asked, completely lost. "To get here," the boulder replied. Most people don't make it this far. They get distracted by the trees, the grass, the endless chatter. You listened, but you kept moving. That's rare. I wasn't trying to be rare, I said. I was just curious, I guess. The boulder chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made the ground tremble. That's the point. Curiosity gets you farther than you think. Before I could respond, the boulder started to glow faintly, the carvings on its surface lighting up like constellations. The forest around me fell silent, the trees and grass and rocks all holding their breath. I felt a strange pull, like the clearing itself was drawing me closer, asking me to step forward. So I did. The moment my hand touched the boulder, the world tilted, not in a dizzying way, but like the universe had turned a page in a book and I was caught in the margin. For a brief second, I saw everything. The mountains I'd hiked, the rivers I'd crossed, the stars I'd slept under, all connected by threads of light that shimmered and pulsed like a living web. And in that web, I wasn't just a wanderer. I was part of the story, just like the trees and the rocks and the fox and the boulder. When I finally pulled my hand back, the glow faded, and the forest came back to life, its chatter resuming as if nothing had happened. Not bad for a human, the boulder said, its voice softer now. Not bad at all. I made my way back home after that. My boots unusually quiet, my socks surprisingly harmonious. Moose was waiting for me on the porch, tail wagging, as if he'd known I'd come back a little different. And now here I am, writing this down while my coffee mug mumbles something about being underappreciated. I can't explain what happened today. Not fully anyway, but it felt like the world was trying to remind me of something. That everything, no matter how small or ordinary, has its own story. And sometimes if you're quiet enough or curious enough, you might just get to hear it. So, what about you? If the world around you could speak, what do you think it would say? And more importantly, would you stop to listen? You ever have one of those moments where reality feels thin? Like you could poke a hole in it if you just looked hard enough? I didn't think stuff like that happened outside of movies, but then there was this night, and now I'm not so sure. It started on the tail end of a brutal week on set. I'd been doubling for this A-list actress who insisted on doing all her own stunts. Spoiler alert, she did none of her own stunts. But I can't complain too much. It's a paycheck, right? Anyway, by Friday night, I was exhausted. Every inch of me hurt. My hair smelled like burnt rubber from a car chase scene, and I just wanted a shower and maybe a bottle of wine. Instead, I found myself driving down the PCH, windows down, music blasting, trying to outrun the tension buzzing in my skull. There's something about the ocean at night, the way it's just this endless, inky void that feels a little dangerous and a little calming all at once. I pulled over at one of those tiny, unmarked turnouts, the kind where you're not even sure if parking's legal, and decided to sit for a bit. There was a little path leading down to the beach, barely lit by the moon. I followed it, kicking off my shoes halfway down because the sand felt cool and grounding under my feet. The beach was completely empty, not even a jogger or a stray dog. Just me, the waves, and a faint scent of salt and seaweed. I plopped down near the water, letting the tide nip at my toes, and stared out into the blackness. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, this glimmer way out on the horizon. But it didn't move like a boat or a reflection. It flickered small and golden, almost like a firefly. I rubbed my eyes, half expecting it to vanish, but it stayed, pulsing faintly. I couldn't explain it, but I felt this pull like I had to keep watching. The longer I stared, the more it seemed to grow, until it wasn't just a glimmer anymore. It was a shape, a figure. Now I know how this sounds. You're probably picturing some mermaid or alien or whatever. But it wasn't like that. The figure was ordinary. A woman in a simple dress, standing on the water like it was solid ground. She didn't look at me, didn't even seem to notice I was there. She was just standing, staring at the horizon, her hair moving in the breeze. I should have been scared, right? I mean, this wasn't normal. But I wasn't. If anything, I felt calm, like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see, but it was okay because it wasn't meant to harm me. And then she turned, not all the way, just her head, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her face. My heart stopped. She looked like me. Not an exact copy, but close enough that my brain couldn't quite process it. Same sharp cheekbones, same wild, unruly hair, same little scar near the eyebrow where I took a bad hit on a dirt bike when I was 13. She smiled, not at me, exactly, but like she knew I was there. And then she raised her hand and waved. I froze. What do you even do in a situation like that? Wave back? Run? Scream? I went with option D. Sit there like an idiot, too stunned to move. And then she just disappeared. 1 second she was there, and the next the water was empty. I sat there for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was I losing it? Had the exhaustion finally caught up with me? Or was it something else, something I didn't have a name for? I finally got up, dusted the sand off my legs, and trudged back to my car, half expecting to turn around and see her standing behind me. But the beach stayed empty, silent except for the waves. Here's the thing though, when I got to my car, there was something on the hood, a single, perfect seashell, smooth and white, glinting faintly in the moonlight. I hadn't seen it when I parked, and there was no one else around to leave it there. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. It wasn't special at first glance, just a shell, but it was warm, almost like it had been sitting in the sun all day. I don't know why, but I slipped it into my pocket and kept it. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The woman, the shell, the feeling that I'd been brushed by something bigger than myself. It wasn't until a week later, when I was cleaning out my bag, that I noticed something strange about the shell. When I held it up to the light, there were these faint, swirling patterns etched into the surface, almost like waves. I still have the shell. It sits on my dresser, right next to the stun awards I like to brag about to anyone who'll listen. And every now and then, when the world feels too heavy or my bruises won't fade fast enough, I hold it in my hand and think about the woman on the water. Maybe she was a trick of the light, a mirage conjured up by my overworked brain. Or maybe she was something else entirely. I don't know, but I like to think she was a reminder that even when we're drowning in chaos, there's something out there watching, waiting, ready to give us a nudge back to shore. So, what about you? Ever have a moment that made you question everything? And kind of okay, so let me preface this by saying, I'm not crazy. Or, at least I wasn't crazy before last Tuesday. Now, who knows? All I know is I woke up, stretched, and reached for my phone like always, except when I touched it, it flinched. Yeah, flinched, like buzzed and skittered an inch away from me on the nightstand. I froze, half asleep, thinking, did I just scare my phone? But then it lit up, and this tiny, annoyed voice said, "Can you not grab me with your greasy morning hands?" Ugh, boundaries. I stared at it, thinking maybe my roommate was playing a prank. Except I don't have a roommate. Just me, my tiny studio apartment, and now apparently my phone with its newfound attitude problem. I'm losing it, I mumbled to no one. Nope, you're not, the phone shot back. But hey, congrats on that 6-hour sleep. You've been averaging 4.5 all week, and honestly, your face shows it. At that point, I screamed like full-on Home Alone hands-on face screamed. Not my proudest moment. It wasn't just the phone, though. Oh no. The second my feet hit the floor, my rug groaned like an old man. Watch where you're stepping, will ya? I'm not made of steel. I jumped back, and my closet door chuckled. What's wrong, Tess? Got cold feet? Oh wait, you do, because you never wear slippers. I bolted to the bathroom, because where else do you go when your furniture starts bullying you? But guess what? The toothbrush wasn't any better. Hey, gentle, you always scrub like you're sanding a piece of wood. My bristles aren't a chew toy. I dropped it in shock, and the toothpaste tube rolled over to join the roast. Seriously, girl? Who even squeezes from the middle? What are you, a barbarian? After a solid 5 minutes of standing there, wide-eyed and toothpaste-less, I realized this wasn't some half-dream state. This was real. My stuff had started talking. And not just talking, complaining. They all had opinions, and none of them were nice. The frying pan called me out for burning eggs 3 days ago. My Wi-Fi router whined about how I use it all the time but never acknowledge it. Even my shampoo joined the pile-on. Do you know how hard it is being half-empty for weeks? Just finish me already. By mid-morning, I was ready to cry or scream, but then, out of nowhere, my goldfish, Captain Bubbles, piped up. Don't listen to them. he gurgled, bubbles popping with every word. You're doing great, kid. Wait, you can talk too? Yeah, but unlike those bozos, I'm actually on your side. Honestly, you feed me on time, you clean my tank. It's a good life. Just, maybe less flakes and more bloodworms? Spice it up a little? I burst out laughing. And let me tell you, nothing feels more unhinged than giggling at a fish while your microwave in the background mutters. She's finally lost it. But here's the thing. Once I got past the initial what the actual phase, it all started to feel kind of fun. Like the world had cracked open, and I was getting a sneak peek into the secret lives of my surroundings. For example, did you know my socks have a love-hate relationship? They're jealous when one gets lost, but also secretly relieved because, and I quote, she sweats like a marathon runner. My water bottle? It's a total drama queen, claiming it's exhausted from being carried everywhere but never appreciated. By the afternoon, I decided to test the limits of this whole talking thing situation. I stepped outside, sat on the edge of the sidewalk, and looked at the cars whizzing by. Sure enough, the first one, a beat-up red Toyota, yelled, "Move it, lady! I got places to be." A palm tree swayed overhead, laughing. Don't mind him. He's always in a rush. Toyota drivers, am I right? I gasped. Trees talk too. Of course we talk. Who do you think's been laughing at you every time you trip on the sidewalk? Let me tell you, finding out trees have a sense of humor? Humbling. But it wasn't all bad. When I made it to the beach later, the sand whispered under my feet like a soft chorus of voices. Welcome back, it murmured. Stay as long as you like. The waves, however, were extra. They roared dramatically. The chosen one returns. Speak, human. What secrets do you wish to learn? I don't know. What's the meaning of life? The ocean paused, then said, like I'd tell you. Rude. By dinner time, I'd fully embraced it. My fridge was now my unofficial therapist. You stress eat too much, it said, but hey, at least you're not one of those people who refrigerates bananas. My air fryer, meanwhile, declared itself the king of kitchen appliances and refused to work unless I complimented it first. I did. I have no shame. When it got dark, I lay in bed, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment. Even though I'd spent the day being roasted by inanimate objects, I couldn't help but feel comforted, like I wasn't alone anymore. Sure, my chair's a jerk, and my TV remote keeps bragging about its unmatched durability, but they're my jerks. Anyway, if you woke up tomorrow and everything around you started talking, how do you think you'd handle it? Would you love it, hate it, or just move into the woods and pretend it wasn't happening? Personally, I think I'll stick around. I mean, who else gets life advice from their goldfish? Here's how it started. I was trying to save a pigeon. Yeah, I know, real heroic. There's a little park near my place, and I was walking through it with a thermos of chamomile tea. Don't judge. It's good for stress. When I saw this pigeon flapping around like it was trying to break dance. One wing looked bent, and it couldn't take off. I'm not a bird guy, but I figured I couldn't just leave it there. So, I crouched down, trying to figure out how to pick it up without getting pecked. That's when I noticed the band around its leg, bright red, like the ones racing pigeons wear. Only this one had a tiny brass tag dangling off it, about the size of a penny. Naturally, I leaned in to read it, and in the smallest, most precise script I've ever seen, it said, "Take me to the clock tower." Now, I don't know about you, but I've watched enough movies to know this is how weird adventures start. And sure, I had stuff to do. There's always something. But let's be real. When a pigeon with a literal brass tag asks you for help, you go. The closest clock tower I could think of was a couple of miles away, at an old church on the edge of the neighborhood. I wrapped the pigeon in my scarf, tucked it under my arm, and started walking. It didn't fight me much, which was either a good sign or a bad one. I wasn't sure yet. The church was one of those Gothic types, all spires and gargoyles, the kind of place that looks haunted even when it's sunny. When I got there, I half expected someone to stop me, but the doors were wide open. Inside, it smelled like dust and candles, and the air had that heavy quiet you only find in churches and libraries. I didn't see anyone, so I just headed up. The stairs wound around and around, creaking under my boots, until I finally reached the top. The clock tower was cramped, filled with gears and levers that clicked and whirred with the rhythm of the massive clock face. And in the middle of it all was a woman. She was sitting on a wooden stool, hunched over a small wooden table covered in jars of paint and brushes. She didn't look up when I walked in, just kept painting these intricate designs on what looked like little slips of paper. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and she had this air about her, calm but focused, like she was in her own world. I cleared my throat. "Oh, I think this is yours." That got her attention. She looked up, eyes sharp and curious, and then she saw the pigeon. Her face softened, and she stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, you found him? Good. Yeah, but how did you?" I gestured at the tag, at the bird, at the absurdity of the whole situation. She just smiled, taking the pigeon from me like this was the most normal thing in the world. "He's one of my messengers," she said, as if that cleared anything up. She set the pigeon down on the table, where it promptly stopped flapping and just settled like it had come home. I must have looked completely lost because she laughed, a soft, warm sound. "I know it's strange. Thank you for bringing him back." "No problem," I said, still trying to wrap my head around it. "But what kind of messages does a pigeon deliver? And why the clock tower?" Instead of answering, she picked up one of the slips of paper she'd been painting. It was covered in a pattern of tiny, golden swirls, so delicate it looked like it had been spun out of sunlight. She held it out to me. "Here, a thank you." I took it, turning it over in my hands. It wasn't paper, not really, more like a thin sheet of something metallic but warm to the touch. The design seemed to shift as I moved it, like they were alive. "What is it?" I asked, half whispering. She tilted her head, considering. "It's a map, of sorts." "A map to what?" Her smile widened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she picked up the pigeon and walked to the open window. With a gentle toss, she released it, and it soared out into the gray sky, its broken wing miraculously fixed. I should have asked more questions. Who she was, what she meant by messengers, why the pigeon led me here in the first place. But something about the way she looked at me, calm and sure, made me think I wasn't supposed to know everything. Not yet. When I left the clock tower, the slip of gold was still in my pocket. It stayed there for weeks, a mystery I couldn't solve but couldn't let go of either. Every so often, I'd take it out, watching the designs shift and shimmer, and I'd wonder, was it really a map? And if so, where was it supposed to lead me? I haven't figured it out yet, but I like to think that maybe one day I will. And until then, I've got the story of the pigeon, the clock tower, and the woman with her golden maps. So, what about you? Have you ever stumbled into something that felt like it wasn't meant to make sense right away? Something you couldn't explain, but couldn't stop thinking about? Alright, so let me tell you about this date that didn't start like a date, but turned into something. I don't even have the right word for it. Maybe weirdly beautiful? You'll see. It was a Thursday night, and I was supposed to meet this guy Mike for drinks at a pub downtown. Teresa, yes, same Teresa, professional meddler, had set it up, swearing he was perfect for me because he liked hiking and had a rescue dog. "You both like broken things," she said. Real confidence booster. Anyway, I show up, and Mike is 20 minutes late. Strike one. I'm sitting there nursing a sad soda water because the bartender looked at me sideways when I ordered my usual bourbon neat. I'm thinking, great, another no-show. Should have just stayed home and reorganized my deck of cards. Then in walks Mike, or so I thought. Tall guy, messy hair, wearing one of those shirts that make you wonder if he actually owns an iron. He's carrying a plastic takeout bag and looking around like he's trying to solve a mystery. When he spots me, he hesitates, then waves. I wave back, confused. He comes over and sets the bag on the table. "Hey, you're Jane, right?" His voice is deep, a little gravelly, like he gargles with rocks. "I am," I say slowly. "And you're Mike?" "Not exactly." He sits down across from me, looking sheepish. "I'm Nick. Mike's my brother." "Okay, curveball. Your brother sent you to our date?" Nick scratches the back of his neck. "Kinda. He got stuck at work. He's a nurse and didn't want to leave you hanging. So he asked me to fill in, said you'd understand. Now, under normal circumstances, I would have walked out right then and there. But there was something about Nick. Maybe it was the way he looked genuinely embarrassed. Or maybe it was the fact that he was clutching a deck of Uno cards like they were a lifeline. "What's with the cards?" I asked, nodding toward his hands. "All right." He slid them across the table. "I thought maybe we could play while we wait." to keep it from being too awkward. I stared at him for a second. You do realize you're the awkward part, right? He laughed, this low, rumbling sound that made me forget for a second how weird the situation was. Against my better judgment, I opened the deck and shuffled. All right, Nick the backup brother. Let's play. We started with Uno, and somewhere between his ruthless draw fours and my totally legal peeking at his cards, I forgot I was supposed to be annoyed. He was funny, in a self-deprecating way, and weirdly good at reading people. At one point, he stopped mid-game and said, "You're a private investigator, aren't you?" I froze, my hand hovering over the deck. "How do you know that?" Mike told me. Said I'd have to watch myself, or you'd figure out all my secrets. He smirked. "So far, all you've uncovered is my terrible poker face. Maybe you're just good at hiding the juicy stuff." I shot back, but his comment stuck with me. Most people, when they find out what I do, either get defensive or try to impress me with their so-called mysteries. But Nick didn't seem fazed. It was refreshing. Eventually, the bartender came over and told us the kitchen was closing. Nick reached for the takeout bag he'd brought and pulled out 2 styrofoam containers. Almost forgot. Mike said you'd be hungry. Inside was fried chicken, mac and cheese, and collard greens. My favorite. I looked at him, stunned. "You didn't even know me, and you brought me dinner?" He shrugged, like it was no big deal. "Mike told me what you like. Figured it was the least I could do." "Least you could do would have been not showing up," I teased, but my voice cracked a little. Because honestly, no one had done something that thoughtful for me in years. We ate, sitting there in the half-empty bar, talking about everything and nothing. Nick told me about his job as a woodworker, glorified sawdust janitor, he called it, and how he once built a bookshelf so crooked it looked like it belonged in a Tim Burton movie. I told him about my most ridiculous case involving a stolen inflatable Santa, and he laughed so hard he spilled his drink. The thing is, it didn't feel like a date. It felt like meeting someone who just got me, like we'd been friends for years and were catching up after a long time apart. And when the bar finally closed and we had to leave, I realized I didn't want the night to end. As we stood outside, Nick shoved his hands in his pockets and said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad Mike got stuck at work. You're way cooler than him." I smiled. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you came." Then, before I could overthink it, I pulled out a card from my deck, the Queen of Hearts, and handed it to him. "Keep this. You can give it to Mike or, keep it for yourself." Nick took it, his fingers brushing mine for just a second. "I'll keep it," he said, tucking it into his wallet. "And maybe if Mike screws up again, I'll get to use it as an excuse to see you." Spoiler alert, he didn't need an excuse. Mike never did call me, but Nick, he texted the next day. Said he had a Tim Burton bookshelf to show me. That was 2 years ago. Now the Queen of Hearts sits on our nightstand, right next to the crookedest bookshelf I've ever seen. So yeah, have you ever had a date that went completely sideways, but somehow ended up being the best thing that ever happened to you? Because I didn't even know that was possible until now. I never thought my life would revolve around a rusty van and a fryer that spits oil like it's mad at the world. But here I am, Mick Jensen, 47 years old, food truck owner, and self-proclaimed king of culinary chaos. My truck's called Gusto Bust, which might sound like a catchy name for some trendy pop-up, but really it's because half the time things go wrong in ways only Bust can describe. I used to be a chef in a real kitchen, the kind with white tablecloths, complicated menus, and even more complicated people. The restaurant was called Arbor and Vine, which is pretentious speak for we charge $35 for asparagus. It was all fine and dandy until I realized my entire life had become one long, sweaty shift punctuated by the occasional stiff drink. My breaking point wasn't some huge drama. It was a Tuesday night, mid-dinner rush, when my boss threw a tantrum over a single overcooked scallop. I looked at him, looked at the scallop, and thought, there's got to be more to life than this. Turns out there is, if you're willing to throw caution, stability, and your savings to the wind. I left the restaurant with no real plan, just a vague idea about doing something fun with food. A month later, I saw her, a Craigslist ad for a food truck, barely roadworthy, but priced to sell. The seller, an older guy named Jerry, tried to talk me out of it. "This thing will break your heart, man," he said, but I was already imagining the menu. I handed him the cash, and just like that, Gusto Bust was born. The concept? Whatever fits in a basket. That's not the official tagline, but it might as well be. Burgers, tacos, fried pies, you name it, I'll try it, and I'll probably screw it up before I get it right. My first menu included something called ramen burritos. They were exactly what they sound like. Ramen noodles wrapped in tortillas with a dollop of spicy mayo. People were not ready. One guy said it felt like college and regret had a baby. Fair. It's not all misses, though. My chili cheese waffle dogs are a certified crowd pleaser, and the maple bacon fried PB&J has developed a cult following. It's not fancy, but it's fun, and fun is what I was missing back in my restaurant days. Now, instead of obsessing over the perfect plating, I'm obsessed with finding out how many foods can be improved by deep frying. Spoiler, it's most of them. The truck itself has more personality than I ever will. The engine sounds like it's gargling marbles. The paint job's been touched up so many times it's practically abstract art, and the fryer has a mind of its own. One time, mid-lunch rush, it decided to stop heating altogether. I panicked, offered everyone cold brewskis for $1, and called it a day. The next morning, it worked fine like nothing ever happened. I named it Judas after that. My days start early, earlier than I'd like. I wake up, get the truck ready, and roll into whatever spot looks promising. Some days it's downtown, where the tech crowd lines up for artisan chaos, as one guy called it. Other days, I hit the parks or neighborhoods, chasing festivals and farmers markets. I'll admit, I've become a bit of a parking ninja, squeezing gusto bust into spaces it absolutely shouldn't fit. One time, I got wedged between two food trucks so tight, I had to climb out through the back door. The owners of the other trucks just shook their heads and muttered something about amateurs. Whatever. The best part of the job? The people. Food trucks attract characters. There's Donnie, the conspiracy theorist who swears my tater tots are government-issued because they're too good. Or Lucy, a 9-year-old with big glasses who orders grilled cheese every time but insists on giving me constructive feedback. Last week, she said the bread wasn't crispy enough. She was right, and I told her so. Then there's Marcy, an elderly woman who once called my fried pickles a spiritual experience. I gave her a free basket on the spot. Not every customer's a gem. You'd be surprised how many people argue about prices. Look, if you want a $3 burger, hit up the dollar menu. You come to Gusto Bust, you're paying for creativity, and okay, maybe a little bit of my truck repair fund. One guy got so mad about my $7 grilled cheese that he tried to lecture me on economics. I told him, it's not just cheese and bread, it's an adventure. He didn't buy it, literally or figuratively. The truck also gets its fair share of weirdos. Last month, a guy showed up in a full-on pirate costume. He ordered a double bacon cheeseburger and paid entirely in coins. When I asked if he was in character for something, he just winked and walked off. Another time, I had a group of college kids try to order everything on the menu for a TikTok challenge. They ended up puking behind the truck after attempting my ghost pepper chili fries. Amateur hour. Even on the hard days, I love it. There's something freeing about making food that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's not about Michelin stars or critical acclaim. It's about giving people a reason to smile, even if it's because their waffle burger fell apart mid-bite. And for me, it's about finding joy in the little things. The sizzle of oil, the laughter of customers, the way the truck smells like melted cheese and adventure. At night, after the last customer's gone and the city quiets down, I sit on the truck step, crack open a cold beer, and think about how far I've come. From overcooked scallops to over-the-top fried food, it's been a ride. A messy, chaotic, ridiculous ride. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. It started with a toaster, or to be specific, my toaster. One that I hadn't thought about in years, except to shove bread in its gaping maw and hope for something golden instead of charcoal. But there it was, sitting on my counter last week, blinking at me like it had something to prove. You see, my toaster has this little lever you can pull to see how your toast is doing mid-cycle. Not a huge deal, but somehow it felt revolutionary the first time I noticed it. I mean, I've been living with this toaster for 5 years, and only now am I realizing it has a toast preview function. As I stood there, half laughing at my own obliviousness, I thought, wow, this is where we are now. This is modern life, getting genuinely impressed by a toaster. The thing is, it's not just a toaster. It's everything. Every corner of my life is filled with these tiny, unassuming marvels I don't even register until they smack me upside the head. Like the other day at the park, I was fiddling with this water bottle I got online. It's one of those fancy ones with a built-in straw and a time chart on the side telling you when to drink. As if the bottle is my boss now. But as ridiculous as it sounds, I kind of love it. It's like having a tiny hydration coach that gently bullies me into not turning into a human raisin. And here's where things get weirder. I spend most of my time in nature. I'm a park ranger. My job is to help people reconnect with the dirt under their feet and the sky above their heads. I track bears like Chunky Steve, who have zero respect for personal property, rescue lost hikers who think a granola bar is survival gear, and watch sunsets that look like they were painted by Bob Ross on an emotional day. You'd think I'd be this rugged, tech-free person who sneers at anything with a battery. But no, I'm the woman who gets emotional about her toaster. Sometimes I wonder if it's because modern life has become so seamless. Things just happen now, like I needed batteries last week. The plainest thing in existence. And instead of going to a store like a normal person, I ordered them online while eating leftover lasagna. 3 hours later, they showed up on my porch. The guy who delivered them waved like we were old friends, and I waved back, even though I didn't know his name. I mean, why would I? I know more about the settings on my air fryer than the people I see every day. But somehow, that feels normal too. Here's the funny part though. As much as I roll my eyes at the absurdity of it all, I've leaned all the way in. Like, take memes. They've basically replaced real conversations in my life. Last month, I sent my sister a picture of a raccoon looking like it had seen some stuff, with the caption, "Me at 7:59 a.m., realizing I have a meeting at 8. She responded with a cat meme, and we went back and forth like that for 10 minutes. No actual words, just pictures of animals embodying existential dread. And it was the best conversation we'd had in weeks. Sometimes I think memes are the new poetry, but then I laugh because I sound like one of those guys who writes think pieces about the death of nuance. The quirkiest part of all this is how none of it feels weird anymore. Like I don't blink when someone live streams their dog barking at a squirrel, or when my friend uploads a picture of her coffee and captions it, "Mood, caffeinated." It's just what we do. And honestly, I kind of love it. Last week, I was out hiking near Morrison when I came across a guy meditating on a rock. Not unusual, except he was surrounded by cameras, fancy ones with tripods and everything. He was filming himself meditating. For what? A YouTube channel? Or TikTok trend? Who knows? But I found myself rooting for him. Like, yeah man, record your Zen moment. Share it with the world. It's the same feeling I get when I see someone meticulously staging their lunch for Instagram. Sure, part of me thinks, just eat the sandwich. But another part of me gets it. We're all just trying to make life a little shinier, a little more fun. Even if it's ridiculous. Even if it's a toaster that lets you check on your bread, or a water bottle that tells you to hydrate like it's your life coach. Maybe that's the beauty of it. These little things, as silly as they seem, make life feel connected. Like we're all in on the same joke. So yeah, I'll keep sending raccoon memes and naming bears like Curious Karen, who won't stop poking their noses into tents. Because it's those little things, the quirks, the absurdities, that make this messy modern world feel like home. What about you? What's the one modern thing that makes you stop and think, this is ridiculous, but I love it anyway? Alright, let me set the scene for you. I'm at a gas station somewhere outside Amarillo, leaning against my truck, waiting for the tank to fill up when I see this lone tumbleweed roll across the lot. Normally, I wouldn't give it a second thought. It's a tumbleweed. They're basically nature's version of whatever. But this one? It was moving slow, almost hesitant, like it wasn't sure where it was supposed to go. And for reasons I can't fully explain, I started talking to it. I said, "Where you heading, partner?" Like it was going to answer me. Now, to be fair, I'd just driven through the night on a haul from Houston, so maybe I wasn't thinking all the way straight. But there was something about that tumbleweed that felt familiar. Like it was lost, maybe, or just tired of rolling around aimlessly. I know. Cheryl, you're 45 years old. You've seen your fair share of tumbleweeds, and none of them have ever been worth pondering. But this one got me. It reminded me of this old story my granddaddy used to tell about how tumbleweeds are just plants trying to find a home, but never quite making it. I don't know if that's true, but it stuck with me. So there I am, philosophizing about a dang weed in a gas station parking lot when the pump clicks off and reality snaps me back. I climb up into the cab of my truck, ready to hit the road again, but I keep thinking about that tumbleweed. About how for the last year or so, I've been feeling a little untethered myself. See, when you're on the road as much as I am, home becomes this weird, blurry thing. It's there, but it's not. I got a house, sure, with a garden out back and a fridge full of condiments I keep forgetting to throw away. But it doesn't always feel like home, you know? Not in the way it did when I was a kid, running barefoot through the yard with dirt on my knees and not a care in the world. These days, home feels more like a pit stop, a place to refill the tank before I head out again. Anyway, about an hour later, I stop at this little diner on the side of the highway. One of those places where the coffee tastes like regret and the waitress calls you hon, no matter how old you are. I'm halfway through a plate of pancakes when this older couple walks in, holding hands like they're teenagers. They sit in the booth across from me, and I can't help but watch them. The husband is one of those guys with a big belly and a bigger laugh, and he's teasing the waitress about the size of the menu like it's the funniest thing in the world. Meanwhile, his wife is fussing with his napkin, smoothing it out, and tucking it under his plate like it's some kind of love language. They're both grinning like they've got a secret, and I'm sitting there with my sad little plate of pancakes, feeling like I've just stumbled into a Hallmark movie. At one point, the man leans over and says something to his wife. I don't know what, but it must have been good, because she throws her head back and laughs loud enough to make the cook peek out from the kitchen. And right then, I feel this weird pang in my chest. Not jealousy, exactly, but something close to it. Like I'd been tumbleweeding my way through life for so long, I'd forgotten what it looked like to put down roots. I finished my pancakes, left a tip big enough to make the waitress smile, and got back on the road. But that couple stuck with me, and so did the tumbleweed. A few hours later, I pulled into a rest stop, one of those desolate spots with a lone vending machine and a bathroom that smells like it's been abandoned since the 80s. I wasn't even tired, but something made me stop anyway. I got out of the truck, stretched my legs, and wandered over to a little patch of grass by the fence. There was a stray cat sitting there, black and scruffy, with one ear folded over like it had lost a fight. I crouched down, clicked my tongue, and waited for him to bolt, but instead, he walked right up to me. No hesitation, just plopped himself down at my feet like he'd been waiting for me to show up. I laughed and said, "Well, aren't you a bold one?" He looked up at me, all wide-eyed and serious, like he was asking, "So what now?" And I didn't have an answer. I ended up bringing him back to the truck, of course. Named him Tumbleweed, because what else was I going to call him? He curled up in the passenger seat like he owned the place, and we've been traveling together ever since. That was 6 months ago, and in that time, I've started seeing things differently. Home isn't just a house, or a garden, or a fridge full of expired mayonnaise. It's moments, you know? It's a stray cat deciding you're worth sticking around for, or a couple in a diner reminding you that love doesn't have to be complicated to be real. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes you think you're just rolling through life, lost and aimless, but then something or someone comes along and makes you stop. Gives you a reason to stay put, even if just for a little while. So tell me, have you ever had a moment where you felt like you found your footing, even if it was just for a second? Maybe it was a person, or a place, or even a scrappy little cat that decided to claim you. I'd love to hear about it. Bonus points if it involves tumbleweeds or questionable diner coffee. Those seem to be my themes lately. Okay, let me take you back to the weirdest Tuesday of my life. The day I found a secret room. It started, as all great stories do, with me running late. I was supposed to open the studio at 11, but I'd overslept thanks to a marathon of trashy true crime documentaries. So I rolled into work around noon, balancing a coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, only to find the building manager, Bill, pacing outside like a stressed-out penguin. "You're finally here," he barked, his face red from either the heat or the fact that Bill is one bad day away from a blood pressure crisis. "Good morning to you too, sunshine," I said, brushing past him to unlock the door. "There's a problem with the basement," he said, following me inside. Now, here's the thing. My studio is in this old brick building on the east side of Austin, and it's got character. By which I mean it's a crumbling mess of leaky pipes and creaky floors. I've heard more than my share of ghost stories about the place. mostly from Bill, who insists the third floor is haunted by a lady in gray. I don't have time for basement problems, I told him. I've got a client at 1, and I'm behind on my sketches. But Bill wasn't listening. He just kept mumbling about weird noises and a door that shouldn't be there. Now, I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in curiosity, which is how I found myself following Bill down the rickety staircase into the basement. It was dark, damp, and smelled like old bricks and mildew. Exactly what you'd expect from a century-old building. There, Bill said, pointing his flashlight at the far wall. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just shelves piled with dusty tools and boxes. But then, tucked behind a broken chair, I saw a door. It wasn't like the other doors in the basement. It was smaller, older, with an ornate brass handle that looked like it belonged in some Gothic mansion. Was that always there? I asked, already knowing the answer. Nope, Bill said, crossing his arms. Okay, so what's behind it? That's the thing, he said. It's locked, and I don't have a key. I should have walked away. I should have said, well, that's weird, and gone back upstairs to finish my sketches. But instead, I reached out and grabbed the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily, like the lock had already been broken. Are you seriously going in there? Bill asked, his voice somewhere between alarmed and annoyed. Obviously, the door creaked open to reveal a narrow passageway, lined with stone walls and faintly lit by, get this, candles. Actual, honest-to-God candles, flickering like they'd been waiting for someone to show up. This is some Scooby-Doo nonsense, I muttered, stepping inside. Bill didn't follow me, which was fine because he would have ruined the vibe with his muttering. The air was cool and damp, and the passageway twisted and turned until I reached a small room. It was empty except for a single table in the center, covered in what looked like old maps and sketches. And then I saw it, an envelope sealed with red wax, sitting right in the middle of the table like it had been left there for me. I probably should have been freaked out, but honestly I was too intrigued. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single piece of paper. The handwriting was elegant, almost calligraphic, and it said, "To the one who seeks, the key is where the stars fall." I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. A riddle? A prank? Some elaborate marketing stunt? Bill! I yelled, turning back toward the passageway. But when I got there, the door was gone. No, seriously. The passageway ended in a blank stone wall. No door, no handle, no sign of how I'd gotten in. Very funny, I shouted, hoping Bill was on the other side. But all I got in return was silence. For a second, I panicked. My brain was doing gymnastics trying to figure out if this was some kind of fever dream or if I'd actually stumbled into Narnia. But then I remembered the note. The key is where the stars fall. It didn't take me long to figure it out. There's this mural on the side of the building, an abstract design of stars falling into a river. It's one of the reasons I rented the place in the first place. When I finally made it back upstairs, Bill was gone, but the mural was still there, and I noticed something I hadn't before, a tiny metal key embedded in one of the stars. I pried it out and held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it. It was old, heavy, and intricately designed, like it belonged to some ancient clockwork mechanism. I still don't know what it opens. I've tried every lock in the building, but nothing fits. I keep it in my memory jar now, alongside the other trinkets and stories my clients leave behind. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that room, about the candles and the note, and the fact that the door disappeared like it had never been there. Was it some elaborate joke? A hidden part of the building's history? Or something else entirely? I don't have answers, but I've got the key. And maybe one day, it'll lead me somewhere new. So, have you ever stumbled across something that made you question everything? Because I'm starting to think the universe loves a good mystery.